The night crept over Chicago like a heavy blanket, muffling the distant sounds of streetcars and the low hum of city life. In the neighborhoods where the outfit's shadow hung thick, people locked their door early, never asking questions and never looking outside longer than they needed to. It wasn't the police they feared. It wasn't the robberies or the rising tide of organized crime. It was a name, a whisper, a ghost who felt more like a nightmare than a man. That name was Mad Sam DeStefano. Long before his reputation took shape, the city already sensed he was different. There was something chilling behind his grin, something unhinged behind his enthusiasm, something disturbing in the way he treated violence as if it were a hobby instead of a business. Many criminals hurt people for profit, some for revenge. But Sam hurt people because it filled something inside him, as if cruelty were oxygen and brutality were nourishment. Even in his early years, before the outfit fully embraced him, neighbors noticed odd things, long nights where screaming echoed from garages, sudden disappearances, and a toxic intensity that made people cross the street when they saw him approach. He wasn't born into poverty the way many Chicago mobsters were. His family lived in a modest but respectable home, trying to carve out an honest living after immigrating from Italy. But Sam's behavior didn't fit the quiet, hard-working image his parents wanted. As a boy, he was unpredictable. Teachers described him as sharp-minded but dangerously impulsive. He enjoyed frightening other children, cornering them with bizarre threats or sudden bursts of rage. When he was punished, he didn't apologize or show understanding. He simply studied the reaction around him with an eerie fascination, as if learning something useful for later. As he grew older, Sam discovered something powerful. Fear made people obey, and Sam loved obedience. By his teenage years, he dove into street-level hustles, petty theft, intimidation, extortion. Crime wasn't just an opportunity. It was a playground for his twisted creativity. What made him stand out wasn't the crimes themselves, but the way he committed them. If someone owed money, Sam didn't just shake them down, he terrorized them for hours. If someone needed a warning, Sam didn't simply deliver it, he created a spectacle. Criminal peers found him unnerving, but his results were undeniable. When Sam wanted something, people gave it to him quickly. By the 1940s and early 1950s, Chicago's organized crime network, known as the Outfit, took notice. Men like Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana valued efficiency, loyalty, and results. Mad Sam was a problem, but he was their kind of problem, at least at first. The Outfit used him for loan sharking, intimidation, and debt collection jobs that required extreme persuasion. Where others hesitated, Sam dove in eagerly, treating each assignment as a stage on which he performed his darkest ideas. Even hardened mobsters kept their distance from him, referring to him as Crazy Sam the lunatic or simply that psycho. But his instability was part of what made him useful. If someone needed to be frightened into paying, Sam was unstoppable. His loan business grew faster than anyone expected. He charged high rates, tormented anyone who fell behind, and used a mixture of charm and insanity to keep victims off balance. One minute he'd be smiling, offering coffee, asking about their families. The next minute he'd describe in gruesome detail what would happen if they missed another payment. People paid him first, before rent, before groceries, before taxes. They feared him more than they feared the Outfit itself. Police records show countless complaints from terrified citizens, but none dared testify. Every time an officer questioned someone about Sam, their eyes dropped, their hands shook, and their voices faltered. Please, they would whisper, I can't talk about him. Even without a conviction, authorities realized they were dealing with someone unlike any criminal they had ever seen. A man with no boundaries, no remorse, and no fear of consequences. By the late 1950s, Sam's power grew beyond collection. He built a reputation as one of the most frightening enforcers in the country. Chicago's underworld whispered stories about what he did inside his basement. Stories so disturbing that even mobsters refused to verify them. Some said he kept tools not meant for construction but for torture, and that he enjoyed explaining every step to his victims before beginning. Others said he recorded screams for his own amusement, rewinding and replaying them like a favorite song. Whether all of it was true or not hardly mattered. Fear had replaced reality, and in crime, fear is often more effective than bullets. But Sam's weakness, the same instability that fueled his brutality, started creating cracks in his alliances. The Outfit valued discipline. Sam valued chaos. He didn't know how to stay quiet or low profile. While the Outfit dealt in structured crime, bribes, gambling rackets, and political connections, Sam sought attention. He filed lawsuits against the government, spoke to the press, and behaved like a carnival act with a gun. Instead of hiding his activities, he flaunted them. Instead of showing caution, he bragged loudly. His temper was volcanic, erupting over trivial disagreements. Even the men who once supported him began to consider him a liability. Still, no one dared cross him openly, not yet. There was a moment, a specific point in time. when even the outfit realized Sam had drifted beyond their control. It happened after a brutal incident involving a man who tried to move out of the city without paying his debt. Sam tracked him down, dragged him back, and spent hours teaching him the meaning of loyalty. The man survived barely, but the story spread like wildfire. People didn't speak openly about what Sam did, but their silence said enough. The outfit leaders understood the risk. If Sam attracted too much heat, federal investigators would soon be knocking on their doors, and once the feds were involved, the quiet empire the outfit had built could begin to unravel. But Sam didn't see the danger, he only saw power. The more people feared him, the more he enjoyed pushing boundaries. He walked into restaurants, uninvited, demanded special treatment, shouted in public, and intimidated anyone who glanced at him the wrong way. Cops avoided confronting him unless absolutely necessary. Judges dreaded having his cases in their courts. Even fellow criminals began plotting how to survive if one day Sam's madness turned toward them. And yet, despite everything, Sam believed he was untouchable. He believed the outfit needed him. He believed fear would protect him. But Chicago's underworld doesn't protect liabilities, and Sam DeStefano, the monster they once used, was slowly becoming a threat they would eventually have to eliminate. Chicago changed with the seasons, but the city's underworld shifted even faster. As the outfit expanded its grip on businesses, unions, and gambling dens, Mad Sam DeStefano carved a parallel empire, built not on structure but on terror. His loan sharking operation grew like wildfire, reaching deep into neighborhoods where people struggled to make ends meet. Some borrowed out of desperation, others out of greed. But all of them eventually discovered the same terrible truth. With Sam, there was no mercy. Miss one payment, break one rule, or even hint at running, and his wrath would arrive quicker than a police siren on a quiet street. He understood fear with a scientist's precision. He knew the way a voice could make a grown man shake, how silence could feel like a threat, and how unpredictability made people compliant. When he spoke, people listened. When he smiled, they trembled, and when he clapped a hand on someone's shoulder, as if greeting an old friend, they prayed it wasn't the last friendly gesture they'd ever feel. Every interaction with him carried an invisible weight, the understanding that madness lived behind his eyes, waiting for an excuse to burst out. His collections were legendary. He rarely did things the simple way. If a man owed $20, Sam treated it like a personal insult. He might show up at the man's house at dawn, banging on the door like a battering ram, shouting loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Or he might wait quietly in a car, engine off, lights out, watching the house, until the debtor stepped outside. Sometimes he approached with a friendly wave and a cheerful greeting, as if they were meeting at a family picnic. Other times he exploded into a shouting rage, accusing the men of betrayal, disrespect, and treachery. Victims never knew which version of Sam they would get, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Despite his brutality, Sam had a strangely charismatic side. He could talk fast, joke easily, and entertain a room with wild stories. Outsiders sometimes found him likable at first, mistaking his manic energy for enthusiasm. But anyone who spent more than a few minutes with him sensed the sharp edge beneath the laughter. His expressions changed too fast. His voice rose unexpectedly, and his eyes darted with a predatory alertness. Even when he was smiling, he looked like someone waiting for an opportunity to snap. In the early days of his criminal rise, Sam developed a fascination with legal battles. He viewed the justice system not as a threat, but as a stage where he could perform. He filed lawsuits against government officials, court employees, law enforcement agencies, anyone he believed had wronged him, real or imagined. He would walk into court wearing loud suits, waving stacks of papers, shouting about conspiracies and corruption. Judges shook their heads in disbelief. Lawyers dreaded being assigned to his cases. Prosecutors found themselves facing a man who treated the courtroom like a circus tent. These outbursts made headlines. For the first time, Sam wasn't just feared in dark alleyways and corner bars. He was becoming a public spectacle. But while he enjoyed the attention, the outfit did not. They preferred quiet power, not loud theatrics. They could excuse violence, but they couldn't excuse exposure. Sam's antics drew unwanted eyes to their operations, the very thing they worked hardest to avoid. Behind closed doors, conversations began shifting. Men whispered that Sam was losing control. Others argued he never had control to begin with. Still, he made money, a lot of it. His loan business alone earned more than many mid-level mob captains. People paid him before anyone else. Even legitimate businessmen, corner store owners, taxi drivers, and restaurant workers borrowed from him because they knew the outfit's typical collectors were predictable. Sam was not, and predictable danger, to some, felt safer than unpredictable madness. But that illusion always shattered sooner or later. One night, a small-time grocery owner named Angelo fell behind on his payments. Business had slowed, his bills piled up, and he chose to pay his mortgage instead of Sam. A simple, human decision, a reasonable one to anyone living a normal life. But Sam didn't care for reasons. Reason, to him, was an excuse. And excuses were something he delighted in crushing. He arrived at the grocery store, after closing, slipping in through the back door as Angelo swept the floor. The man froze when he saw him, broom falling from his hands. Sam smiled a wide, unnatural grin. He walked across the quiet store, stepping on fallen vegetable leaves, dragging a chair behind him. He placed it in the center of the room, sat down, crossed his legs, and folded his hands like a guest waiting for tea. Then he asked Angelo, in a soft voice, why the payment was late. And Angelo, trembling, explained everything. The bills, the slow business, the sleepless nights. He begged for a few more days. Sam nodded politely. He listened carefully. When Angelo finished, Sam let a moment of silence stretch through the air, as heavy as the smell of old produce. Then Sam stood up, flipped the chair to the ground, and erupted into a rage so fierce that the shelves rattled. He chased Angelo around the store, smashing jars, toppling displays, shouting curses and insults, but he didn't kill him. He didn't even hurt him seriously. The violence was symbolic, theatrical, a demonstration of who held the real power. The next morning, neighbors found the store in shambles, but Angelo refused to file a police report. He simply whispered the same phrase so many had whispered before him: "You don't understand." It was him. Incidents like these widened the gap between Sam and the outfit. They relied on intimidation, yes, but they also relied on stability. Their network operated like a business empire, calculated, organized, cautious. Sam operated like a storm, unpredictable and destructive. The outfit tolerated storms only when they served a purpose. But Sam caused chaos even when there was nothing to gain from it. He handled federal agents the same way he handled debtors, with an unstable blend of charm, mockery, and aggression. When questioned, he would give long, rambling answers, suddenly switch topics, accuse the agents of hidden agendas, and sometimes laugh for no clear reason. He once spent nearly an hour describing government conspiracies involving ghosts and secret societies, forcing agents to document every word for the record. His unpredictability made interrogations nearly impossible, but it also painted a target on his back. Federal investigators began studying him more closely, realizing he was a gateway to deeper criminal networks. Inside the outfit, his behavior ignited resentment. Some feared him, others hated him, and a few simply wished he would disappear. But no one wanted to be the one to confront him. Even powerful men hesitated. Sam's volatility made him dangerous, and taking steps against him felt like provoking a wild animal. But the whispers grew anyway. More and more, people asked the same question: how long could the outfit tolerate a man who acted without limits? Sam, meanwhile, believed he was invincible. He believed his fearsome reputation protected him from consequences. He believed his connections kept him safe. And he believed that no matter how much trouble he caused, the outfit would never dare turn against him. But the truth he refused to see, was that the outfit didn't fear him. They only feared the trouble he brought. And trouble, in the criminal world, has an expiration date. Chicago's criminal world thrived on secrets, but Sam DeStefano was a one-man factory of chaos that constantly threatened to expose those secrets. The outfit operated like a hidden machine, silent and efficient, and every gear depended on the other. Sam, on the other hand, behaved like a gear spinning freely, tearing away at anything around it. Yet despite this chaos, he continued to build wealth and power, pulling thugs, desperate workers, and frightened businessmen into his orbit. Money flowed to him because fear was an effective currency, and Sam was the banker of fear. His home life offered no normalcy. Behind closed doors, Sam lived in a world of paranoia and manic energy. He paced rooms at night, muttering to himself, convinced that neighbors spied on him, or that government agents lurked in the trees outside. He installed bizarre security measures, not to keep criminals away, but to prevent imaginary intruders from entering. Family members rarely invited people over. Guests were unpredictable variables that Sam didn't tolerate well. Even those closest to him learned to speak carefully, to avoid triggering suspicion or anger. His mood could shift without warning, and when it did, the entire house held its breath. He treated his basement like a personal workshop, not a place for tools or repairs, but for planning, preparing, and imagining ways to exert control. Tables were cluttered with papers, ledgers, and odd objects that hinted at his dark obsession. It was a room no one visited unless Sam invited them. And even then the visits were short and filled with tension. Some who entered said the atmosphere felt colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves absorbed the memories of whatever happened there. Sam spoke about his basement with a hint of pride, calling it his office, though anyone who heard the stories knew it was far more sinister. The outfit tolerated all of this as long as he made money. But Sam wasn't satisfied with just loan sharking. He wanted influence. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be seen as more than a collector or enforcer. He sought opportunities to expand into gambling, narcotics, and even legitimate businesses. But these ambitions collided with the outfit's structure. They didn't allow men like Sam, unstable, loud, unpredictable, to climb too high. His value was in his madness, but that same madness kept him chained to the lower rungs of the hierarchy. Sam resented this. He believed he deserved more. He believed his contributions outweighed those of men with polished manners and respectable suits. He convinced himself that he had earned a higher position, and he began speaking openly about it. Too openly. Those who listened grew uneasy. It was one thing to desire power, it was another to speak about it in bars, on sidewalks, or in the presence of men who reported upward. Sam didn't understand discretion. His ambition was loud, and his complaints were louder. Still, no one confronted him directly. They simply reported it, quietly, up the chain. Sam's delusions of grandeur extended into his interactions with law enforcement. He believed federal agents admired him, that they viewed him as a brilliant mind fighting against corruption. During interrogations, he offered long speeches about justice, framed himself as a victim, and portrayed the government as a villain targeting him because of his intelligence. He often claimed he had supernatural insight, that he could predict when someone would betray him. Agents left the room confused, frustrated, and sometimes disturbed. They couldn't tell where the performance ended and the real madness began. But behind his theatrics, Sam made mistakes, big ones. He left trails where others covered their tracks. He argued with associates in public. He filed complaints against police officers who pulled him over for minor violation. He even accused prosecutors of participating in conspiracies against him, speaking loudly in courtrooms where reporters sat only a few feet away. Every outburst created new vulnerabilities, new opportunities for investigators to gather evidence, and new reasons for the outfit to worry about his loyalty. The outfit prided itself on discretion. Sam was the opposite, and while he remained useful, he was also a growing liability. Tension reached new heights when Sam attempted to expand his operations without approval. He began lending money to people outside his assigned territory, stepping into areas controlled by other outfit members. When warned, he brushed off the complaints, claiming he had earned the right to grow his business however he pleased. He didn't understand, or refused to understand, that crossing boundaries in the mob world wasn't simply a business issue. It was an act of disrespect, and disrespect in that world carried deadly consequences. His unpredictability also affected partnerships. Businessmen who borrowed from him often complained privately to other mob members, asking for relief, or for someone else to handle their loans. They were willing to pay, but not under the threat of Sam's cruelty. Some said they preferred prison over owing Sam another dollar. Others simply disappeared from the city overnight, abandoning their jobs and families to escape him. Each disappearance cost the outfit money and attention, creating tension between those who valued profit and those who feared Sam's reaction. Still, he believed he was untouchable. His confidence grew with every rumor of his brutality. In his mind, people feared him because he was powerful, but they feared him because he was unstable. And instability in the criminal world isn't a shield, it's a warning. Sam's paranoia intensified. He believed phone lines were tapped, that strangers followed him on the street, that shadows contained hidden threats. He often confronted people he assumed were spying on him, innocent neighbors, random pedestrians, even store clerks. His temper spiraled into public scenes that left witnesses shaken. While some dismissed him as that crazy gangster, others reported his behavior to police, feeding a growing file on his mental instability. He also turned suspicion toward those closest to him. Associates noticed his questions becoming sharper, more invasive. He demanded to know who they met, where they went, what they discussed. He interpreted harmless comments as insults, and casual disagreements as acts of betrayal. Several men quietly distanced themselves from him, avoiding his calls, skipping meetings, or pretending to be unavailable. But avoidance angered him. Sam took distance as disrespect. And disrespect, according to his twisted logic, required punishment. The outfit struggled with how to handle him. Removing him entirely risked provoking a violent retaliation. Keeping him risked exposure and legal trouble. He was a problem no one wanted to solve, yet one that could no longer be ignored. One particular night made the situation far worse. A group of outfit members met at a quiet lounge to discuss business. They did regularly, keeping conversations short and cautious. But Sam burst in uninvited. He ordered drinks loudly, paced around the table, and began accusing various members of undermining him. He shouted about conspiracies, claiming people were jealous of his success. He even threatened to take matters into his own hands, promising he would clear the rats out himself. The room went silent. Even the bartender froze. No one argued with Sam that night. No one matched his anger. They simply watched him melt down, their minds racing with conclusion. He was no longer just reckless. He was dangerous to the outfit itself. After Sam stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook the windows, the remaining men exchanged glances that said everything words could not. A silent decision formed in that room, the kind that didn't require signatures or meetings, the kind that came from knowing a line had been crossed. Sam DeStefano, once a useful tool, had become a threat that could no longer be allowed to grow. And somewhere deep within Chicago's criminal underworld, plans quietly began to shift toward a future without him. The city moved through its days unaware of the dark tide building beneath it. Chicago had always been a place of contradictions, glittering lights above, quiet horrors below, but none of those hidden horrors compared to the storm swirling inside Sam DeStefano's mind. As he drifted further from reality and further from the control of the outfit, he moved through the streets like a man possessed, convinced he stood at the center of conspiracies that only he could see. In truth, he was becoming a danger not just to those who owed him money, but to the men who once relied on him. After the explosive outburst at the lounge, whispers spread quickly. Men who once tolerated him now watched him with guarded eyes. They spoke in low voices about his unpredictable behavior, his loud tirades, and his growing obsession with imaginary enemies. Sam felt the shift, even if he couldn't name it. He sensed tension in greetings, noticed hesitation in handshakes, and caught the brief glances exchanged behind his back. His paranoia, already a constant companion, grew sharper. He paced more often, spoke to himself more fiercely, and scanned rooms as if searching for hidden threats. Yet even as his mental state unraveled, his loan-sharking empire continued to operate. People still paid him because they feared him. Fear was the one currency he could always rely on, and like any cruel king, Sam ruled through terror. Every late payment became an excuse for him to unleash his fury. Every minor mistake became a betrayal. The stories of what he did to debtors spread like wildfire, turning him into a figure of urban legend. Parents warned their teenage sons not to borrow money from strangers. Store owners whispered prayers when collecting cash. Even criminals from other cities spoke about him with a strange mixture of fascination and dread. But Sam believed these stories were signs of respect, not fear. He convinced himself that he was becoming a legend within the outfit, a man whose name demanded immediate obedience. The truth was far different. His madness had eroded the last traces of loyalty around him. He was alone, even if he refused to see it. One of the clearer signs came when a veteran outfit figure, a calm, measured man known for avoiding unnecessary conflict, approached one of Sam's younger associates and quietly warned him to keep his distance. The associate nodded without argument. That was the first time Sam's circle showed cracks. One by one, people around him attempted to step away, hoping he wouldn't notice. But Sam noticed everything, and instead of recognizing their fear, he interpreted their withdrawal as evidence of the conspiracies he imagined. His world became a maze of imagined enemies. He believed federal agents were following him, that prosecutors manipulated his friends, that police officers planted informants in his neighborhood, and that even his fellow mobsters plotted to ruin him. His victims, his associates, even random strangers became threads in his tangled theories. He wrote long, chaotic lists detailing imagined betrayals. He made late-night phone calls to confront people about things that never happened. He called meetings that made no sense and delivered rambling speeches that left listeners confused or terrified. At the same time, Sam's obsession with lawsuits grew more intense. He filed new legal complaints every month, jumping from one accusation to another. Corruption, discrimination, harassment, conspiracies. Courtrooms became arenas where he projected his madness. He shouted at judges, interrupted lawyers, and insisted that government officials work together in secret to destroy him. His voice echoed through hallways, drawing the attention of reporters and spectators who came to watch his outbursts the way others might watch a bizarre stage show. But while Sam's theatrics amused the public, they horrified the outfit. They saw national attention as poison. Publicity was the enemy of organized crime. Sam's behavior threatened to drag them into investigations they desperately wanted to avoid. Inside the outfit, meetings became more urgent. Names were mentioned, plans were discussed. Sam's value had been weighed, and for the first time, the scales tipped toward danger rather than usefulness. Still unaware of this shift, Sam continued spiraling. One evening he stormed into a small bar, owned by a man who owed him money. The bar was nearly empty. just a few regulars sipping beer, a radio humming in the background. Sam marched in with eyes blazing, grabbed a bottle from the counter and smashed it against the wall. The entire bar froze. The owner stammered out excuses, trying to explain that he just needed a little more time. Sam grabbed him by the collar, dragged him across the counter and slammed him against a refrigerator door so hard the bottles inside rattled. He didn't beat him senseless. He didn't kill him. Instead, he whispered threats in his ear, slow, vivid, terrifying description of what he would do to the man's family if he delayed again. When he left, the bar fell silent. The owner sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. And just like so many before him, he refused to call police. He simply paid. But the damage wasn't limited to frightened victims. Sam's violent confrontations pushed away potential allies and scared off business partners. Even men who once admired his toughness now avoided eye contact when they crossed paths. The outfit wanted to maintain order, but Sam left disorder everywhere he went. The real turning point came when Sam began making threats toward other outfit men. He did it recklessly, without understanding the unwritten codes that governed their world. In his paranoid state, he believed anyone who disagreed with him was working for the government. He even accused high-ranking members of being traitors. These were lines no sane man crossed, and Sam, lost in delusions, didn't even realize he had crossed them. There was a night when a small group of outfit members gathered in a dimly lit apartment to discuss business matters. Sam hadn't been invited, but he showed up anyway, pounding on the door until someone reluctantly let him in. He barged into the room, pointed fingers, and began accusing people of setting him up. His voice rose with every sentence until he was shouting so loudly the neighbors banged on the walls. No one dared argue with him, but every face in that room hardened. Sam walked out convinced he had shown strength. The men he left behind sat silently, exchanging looks they could never take back. From that moment on, the decision was inevitable. Sam spent the following weeks drifting deeper into madness. He stopped hiding his suspicions. He accused everyone of betrayal. He carried weapons everywhere, even to places where they weren't necessary. He began sleeping in different rooms each night, convinced that enemies planned to kill him. His once sharp mind became hazy with obsession. His rants grew longer, his pacing grew faster. His behavior grew so erratic that even those closest to him feared he might snap at any moment. And yet, through all of this, he still believed he was safe. He believed fear made him immortal. He believed no one would dare move against him. But Chicago's underworld operates by its own laws, and those laws are older, colder, and more unforgiving than any man, even a mad one, could ever understand. Somewhere in the shadows, quiet voices made quiet decisions. And the wheels of fate began turning toward a future Sam could not escape. The days that followed brought a tension that even Sam could feel, though. He interpreted it through the distorted lens of his paranoia. He sensed changes in the air. The way people stepped back when he walked past. The way conversations stopped just a second too early when he entered a room. But instead of seeing it for what it was, fear combined with exhaustion, he convinced himself that he was surrounded by enemies, that the entire criminal world had suddenly turned against him. He told himself the outfit feared him because he was too powerful, too clever, too unpredictable. The truth was simpler. They feared the chaos he carried like a disease. Everything he touched became unstable. Every business he entered became a risk. Every gathering he attended became a scene waiting to explode. And while he thought these reactions were signs of respect, they were symptoms of a problem that had grown too large to ignore. But Sam didn't slow down. His desperation only fueled his intensity. He began visiting old associates without warning, appearing at their homes late at night and demanding reassurance of their loyalty. Some tried to calm him, repeating hollow promises that they stood by his side. Others avoided him entirely. A few quietly packed bags and disappeared, leaving town without even bothering to collect their final pay. They knew that remaining in his orbit meant becoming part of his paranoia, and they feared being dragged into a storm they could not survive. Sam noticed every disappearance, every closed door, every whispered conversation. His mind twisted these observations into a grand conspiracy. He believed the outfit had formed a secret council to destroy him, that the government had bribed his own friends, that every missed phone call was a message, every accidental glance a warning. In reality, his circle wasn't plotting against him. They were fleeing for their safety. The more he felt isolated, the more reckless he became. One evening, he cornered a mid-level outfit operative named Vito outside a restaurant. Vito was known for keeping peace within the organization, a man who solved problems quietly and avoided unnecessary bloodshed. But Sam grabbed him by the arm before he could enter the building and demanded to know who had been talking behind his back. His voice rose with every sentence until people on the sidewalk stopped to stare. Vito tried to calm him, gently urging him to lower his voice and step aside. But Sam wasn't listening. He accused Vito of spreading lies, of working with the government, of meeting with prosecutors to arrange his downfall. Vito, tired and visibly annoyed, tried to walk away. Sam shoved him against the brick wall, shouting threats that echoed through the narrow street. Only when a pair of men stepped out of the restaurant, men loyal to Vito, did Sam finally release him. He walked away muttering to himself, unaware that he had just crossed another invisible line. That night, Vito met privately with several outfit figures. He described the confrontation with a tone of disappointment rather than anger, but his message was unmistakable. Sam had become dangerous enough to provoke violence within their own ranks, and violence within the outfit was never tolerated. The decision to remove Sam didn't happen with dramatic speeches or raised voices. It happened quietly, with tired faces and resigned nods. The men in that room understood something Sam never had, that survival in the underworld depended on order, and order couldn't exist while a man like Sam ran wild. Meanwhile, Sam continued spiraling. He carried multiple weapons at all times, patting his coat pockets repeatedly to ensure they were there. He checked windows constantly, convinced snipers were waiting across the street. He heard footsteps where no one walked. He saw patterns in shadows that held no meaning. At night, he barricaded his doors, stacking furniture against them as if preparing for an invasion. His paranoia reached a dangerous peak when he began accusing members of his own family of spying on him. He confronted them with wild explanations and nonsensical theories, insisting that they had been approached by federal agents or bribed by his enemies. These accusations devastated them. They watched him unravel and feared for their safety, yet they still hoped he would return to the man they once knew, even if that man had always been fractured. But Sam didn't want help. He wanted loyalty. Loyalty that matched his demands, his expectations, his distorted view of the world. Anyone who failed to meet his impossible standard became an enemy in his mind. The outfit watched all of this with increasing impatience. They knew Sam had lost whatever restraint he once possessed. They also knew that sooner or later, he would drag them into a war with federal authorities. Investigators were already circling him like vultures, sensing that he was the weak link in the outfit's chain. If Sam felt pressured enough, he might lash out in unpredictable directions, possibly even talk to police. And that possibility was far more terrifying than his brutality. What made the decision final was something small, almost trivial, but deeply symbolic in the world of crime. Sam confronted one of the outfit's bookkeepers, accusing him of altering financial records. The accusation was baseless, just another invention of Sam's fear-twisted mind. But the confrontation was explosive. The bookkeeper, a quiet man with no history of conflict, panicked and reported the incident to his superiors, stating plainly that he could no longer work under the threat of Sam's rage. For the outfit, the message was clear. Sam wasn't just a problem. He was beginning to crumble the foundations of their operations. And yet Sam walked through the days with the illusion of control. He believed his fearsome reputation still protected him. He believed that no matter how loudly he shouted or how many enemies he imagined, the outfit would never dare touch him. In his mind, he was too important. He had terrified too many people, collected too many debts, created too many legends. He didn't realize that legends, in the world he lived in, often ended the same way, quietly, efficiently, and without warning. One afternoon, Sam sat alone in his basement office, flipping through papers he had organized into piles only he could understand. He mumbled to himself, drawing connections between people who had no relationship, creating enemies from shadows. He believed he was piecing together a vast network of traitors. He believed he was on the verge of exposing an entire conspiracy. Above him, the house creaked softly, just a floorboard settling, nothing more. But Sam jerked his head upward, eyes sharp with suspicion. He walked to the bottom of the stairs, listening. His heart raced. He imagined gunmen hiding in the hallway, imagined wiretaps hidden inside vents, imagined the outfit plotting upstairs. He didn't know that the real plotting was happening far from his home, in quiet rooms filled with calm voices and decisive men. Men who had already chosen his fate. Men who understood that Sam DeStefano had become too dangerous, too unstable, and too unpredictable to remain alive. And somewhere deep within Chicago's underworld, Sam's countdown had quietly begun. Night in Chicago had a strange way of swallowing sound. Cars hummed in the distance. The soft glow of street lamps shimmered on wet pavement. And yet in certain neighborhoods, silence felt heavier than noise. That silence deepened around the place. People whispered about the small, unassuming brick house that sat at the end of a narrow street. Its curtains were always closed, its backyard gate always locked, its neighbors always restless. In the daylight it looked ordinary, almost innocent. But after dark, it carried a reputation. People called it a torture factory, a nightmare chamber, a place where the walls had absorbed more suffering than any building should. It was a place no one approached without a reason, and no one left without a memory burned into the nerves of their spine. That house belonged to Mad Sam DeStefano. He chose it carefully, close enough to the city to hide noise among traffic, but isolated enough that no one asked questions. Sam liked places where fear could grow quietly, where the air felt thick and secrets felt safe. To him, this wasn't just a hideout, it was a stage. A place where he could shape terror exactly the way he wanted. For a man obsessed with control, nothing thrilled him more than the ability to decide when someone screamed, cried, or confessed. The inside of the house was oddly spotless. The furniture sat perfectly in place, dustless and clean, as though no one lived there. But the basement told a different story. It was fitted with chains, hooks, a workbench, and a chair no sane person would ever want to sit in. Sam designed it like a twisted laboratory, and he treated it like an artist's studio. To him, crime wasn't chaotic, it was crafted. He would walk into that room with the same calmness another man carried into his office. He'd take off his coat, roll up his sleeves, and begin speaking to his victim in a soft, almost professional tone. For Sam, violence wasn't just a means to an end. It was a method for extracting loyalty, obedience, or revenge, whatever the moment required. And he took pride in being patient. He believed patience was the true difference between an amateur and a master. There was one night that defined his reputation more than any other. It began with a man named Benny, a low-level runner who owed Sam money. Benny wasn't dangerous, he was just careless. But Sam didn't believe in small lessons. He believed in examples. When Benny was grabbed and brought inside, the fear had already settled deep in his bones. He could feel the coldness of the walls, the still air, the sense that the place was designed for suffering long before he even saw the tools. Sam paced in front of him slowly, talking as though lecturing a student. He liked conversation. It was part of the ritual. He told Benny about responsibility, about respect, about the importance of keeping one's word. And as Benny cried and begged, Sam didn't raise his voice. He never needed volume to deliver fear. His power came from the contrast the calm tone paired with the horrific expectation of what was coming. He believed that terror should be systematic. He believed pain should be educational. And he believed that no one forgot a lesson learned in his basement. But this night was different. Something about Benny's trembling, something about the way he apologized, again and again, struck a small, unexpected nerve within Sam. It wasn't sympathy. Sam didn't feel sympathy, but he did feel something like annoyance. Benny's fear was too loud, too chaotic. It disrupted the neat, controlled rhythm Sam preferred. He walked closer, examining Benny as though deciding whether the man was worth the time it would take to teach him a final lesson. Sam crouched down to look him in the eyes, and for a long moment didn't say anything. The silence was its own form of pressure, a heavy blanket smothering the room. Benny's breath shook, the chair rattled under him, and the basement seemed to shrink. Finally, Sam stood up, sighed, and muttered something about wasted potential. Then came the quiet steps, the tools clinking, and the inevitable moment Benny prayed would never arrive. The screams that followed weren't heard by the neighbors. The thick walls swallowed everything. The room was built that way on purpose. Sam didn't like noise escaping. He believed fear should stay contained, never spilling into the world beyond the walls. By the time Benny's ordeal ended, Sam had already moved on mentally, humming softly as he cleaned up. He never rushed. Even his cleanup routine was methodical, everything in its place, everything wiped, everything returned to a cold state of order. Once, after finishing one of his sessions, Sam paused at the door and looked back at the empty basement. He smiled. To him, the room wasn't a symbol of cruelty, it was a tool. A tool that helped him shape his power in the underworld. He believed fear was stronger than money, stronger than guns, stronger than loyalty bought with favors. Fear was permanent. Fear stayed with you. Fear made you predictable. And predictable men were useful. Word of what happened inside that house spread through the city like a shadow that grew each time someone retold it. They exaggerated parts, but they didn't need to exaggerate much. Sam's reputation was already large enough. The Chicago underworld whispered his name with caution. Even hardened criminals avoided getting on his bad side. They kept their promises, paid their debts, and most importantly, never crossed a line he drew. But what people didn't understand about Sam was the strange duality in his life. Outside the house, he presented himself as a businessman. He wore suits, shook hands, and even attended community meetings. He laughed loudly, smiled often, and played the part of the charming Italian entrepreneur. People who met him during the day would have never guessed what he did at night. That contrast made him even more dangerous. A man who could blend so smoothly into normal life was a man who could hide in plain sight. The house remained one of his most guarded secrets. Anyone who entered it entered on his terms. Anyone who left did so with a new understanding of who he really was. And those who didn't leave well, they became part of the building's silent history, part of the whispers that drifted through the neighborhood long after the lights turned off. To outsiders, the house looked lonely, but to Sam, it was loyal. It kept his secrets, It held his darkness, and it reminded him that fear was his greatest weapon. A weapon he sharpened every time someone crossed the wrong line. In the quiet heart of Chicago, behind closed curtains and locked doors, Sam continued building the legend that made him one of the most terrifying figures the city had ever known. And as long as that house stood, so would the stories of the screams no one ever heard. Chicago's underworld was a maze of shifting alliances, old grudges, and unspoken rules. Every corner had its own power structure, and every group had someone pulling strings behind the scenes. But even in this tangled landscape, there were certain figures who remained unseen, whispered about only in private conversation. These were the men who preferred darkness over spotlight, men who shaped the city from the shadows. And among those hidden figures, one name kept resurfacing quietly whenever Sam DeStefano's own shadow grew too large. This man was known only as the Silent Partner. Most people never met him. Those who did rarely spoke about it. They said he wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, wasn't the type to make threats. Instead, he moved with a calm confidence, like someone who knew the map of the underworld better than anyone else. He was older than Sam, more patient, more calculating. Where Sam thrived on chaos, the Silent Partner thrived on stability. Their partnership was strange, almost contradictory, but that contradiction made it powerful. Sam, with all his rage and theatrical violence, needed someone who could balance his storms, someone who could guide the business side of things, someone who could turn fear into profits instead of letting it consume everything in its path. And the Silent Partner needed Sam's reputation. Sam's name could open doors that were locked for others. It was a dangerous partnership, but it worked because both men understood exactly what they needed from each other. Their arrangement wasn't written on paper. It wasn't formal. It existed in quiet conversations, subtle nods, and brief meetings in back rooms that smelled of cigar smoke and old wood. Every time they met, Sam arrived with that restless energy in his steps, pacing, grinning, cracking his knuckles as if waiting for something exciting to happen. The Silent Partner, however, would sit still, watching Sam with tired, knowing eyes, as though he'd already calculated Sam's next 10 moves before Sam took the first step. One particular night defined their relationship more clearly than any other. It was winter, and snow was falling over Chicago, coating the streets in a soft white layer that muffled the usual city noise. Sam drove through the nearly empty roads, humming to himself as flakes melted on his windshield. He was on his way to a small, private supper club, a discreet meeting place reserved for men who didn't want their conversations overheard. Inside, the lights were low, and soft jazz drifted through the air. Sam walked in without removing his coat, his boots leaving a trail of slush on the polished floor. The Silent Partner was already seated at a table in the back, dressed in a dark coat, sipping something warm. Sam plopped down across from him, grinning. "You look like you're thinking too much again," he said. The Silent Partner didn't smile. He rarely did. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying Sam the way a strategist studies the most unpredictable piece on the board. "Word is out," he said quietly. "That house of yours is becoming too loud." Sam laughed. The sound too bright for the dim room. "Loud? Nobody hears anything." "That's not what I mean," the Silent Partner replied. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "People talk. And when people talk, business becomes uncertain." Sam waved a hand dismissively, as though brushing away dust. "Fear is good for business, not when it grows bigger than the money it brings in," the Silent Partner said. The tension at the table wasn't angry, it was structural. It was the tension between fire and ice, between impulse and reason. Sam leaned forward, narrowing his eyes, waiting for the real point. "There's a man we need handled," the Silent Partner eventually said. But handled quietly. That word quietly was one Sam didn't like. His methods were rarely described as quiet, but he respected the man sitting across from him enough to listen. The Silent Partner handed him a small note with a name on it. Sam glanced at it and smiled. "He's nothing," he said. "He's becoming something," the Silent Partner corrected. "And if he isn't stopped now, he'll be a problem later." Sam folded the note carefully and slipped it into his coat. "You want me to bring him to the house?" "No," the Silent Partner said sharply. "No more buddies in that house for a while. It has enough stories inside it already." Sam raised an eyebrow. It wasn't often anyone told him what he couldn't do. But the Silent Partner wasn't just anyone. Sam allowed the command, because it came from the only man he considered equal, if not superior, in the hierarchy of Chicago's criminal world. "I'll take care of it," Sam said quietly, and that was that. After their meeting, Sam walked back into the snow-covered night, his breath curling in the air. In his pocket, the folded note felt strangely heavy, as though it carried more than a name. It carried the weight of a decision someone else had made for him. And Sam wasn't used to following orders. He got into his car and sat in silence for a moment. His fingers tapped across the steering wheel slowly, rhythmically, like someone working through thoughts they didn't want to admit. He didn't like being told to be subtle. Subtlety wasn't his craft. But he also knew the silent partner was right. Too much noise could bring unwanted attention, and unwanted attention could burn everything down, including Sam himself. The night stretched long as he drove toward the address tied to the name. Snow kept falling, blanketing the city in cold secrecy. Sam liked the way snow muted everything. It felt appropriate for the task ahead, silent, clean, decisive. When he reached his destination, he turned off the car engine and watched the building in front of him. Lights were on inside. People laughed somewhere in the distance. It was a warm place in a cold night, but warmth never softened Sam. He stepped out of the car, brushed the snow from his shoulders, and walked toward the building like a shadow moving across fresh powder. The job didn't require chaos. It didn't require theatrics. It required precision. And despite what many believed, Sam was capable of precision when the moment demanded it. He could be sharp, quick, and silent when he wanted to be. Fear didn't always need screams. Sometimes it only needed presence. By the time he walked back to his car, the night remained just as quiet as before. No one saw him. No one followed him. No alarms sounded. Snow covered his footprints, and the city swallowed the moment without a trace. Later, when he met the silent partner again, there were no congratulations, no praise, just a simple nod, acknowledging that the task was complete. That was how their relationship worked. No emotions, no theatrics, just mutual understanding built on the balance between terror and strategy. In the criminal world, partnerships rarely lasted long, but this one endured because neither man needed to trust the other. They only needed to benefit from each other. And as long as Sam continued being the storm and the silent partner continued being the anchor, Chicago's underworld would bend around them like iron heated in fire. Chicago carried its winters like a bruised memory, cold, heavy, and lingering far longer than anyone wanted. The wind slid between the buildings with sharp edges, and the gray sky hung overhead like an old, unwashed curtain. Most people hurried through the streets with their collars pulled tight and their eyes down. But Sam DeStefano walked through the city with the kind of confidence that wind and weather could never touch. The cold didn't shrink him. If anything, it suited him. There was something in the bleakness of winter that matched the dark rhythm of his nature. To most, Sam appeared unshakable. A man made of iron and fire. Someone whose mind could not be penetrated. But even the strongest masks eventually begin to crack, and in the quiet spaces between his violent theatrics, a different version of Sam flickered in and out of existence. Not a weaker version, just a more complicated one. There were days when he didn't go near the house or the clubs or the meeting rooms. Days when he drove aimlessly through the city, winding through narrow alleys and wide boulevards without a destination. He watched people moving through their normal lives, families carrying groceries, kids chasing each other across icy sidewalks, workers warming their hands with cheap coffee cups. These scenes didn't make Sam sentimental. He wasn't built that way, but they did provoke something inside him. An uncomfortable curiosity about a life he never had and never truly wanted. One afternoon, he parked his car near an old church, not because he intended to go inside, but because the quiet surroundings allowed his thoughts to settle. He leaned back in his seat, watching the slow drift of snowflakes through the windshield. His fingers tapped softly on the steering wheel, forming an uneven rhythm. He never admitted it out loud, but moments like this unsettled him more than any confrontation could. Violence was easy. Reflection was not. Sam's childhood had carved a path for him long before he understood what crime even was. He grew up in a world where anger came faster than kindness, where fists spoke louder than words, and where survival wasn't taught, it was demanded. Those early memories never left him. They shaped him, hardened him, pushed him toward a destiny he accepted without resistance. But sometimes, like now, the echoes of those memories returned unexpectedly. He remembered the small apartment where he grew up, the smell of old wood, the sound of arguments bouncing off thin walls, the constant tension that lived in the air. He remembered how fear became a second language, one he learned long before he learned how to read. And most of all, he remembered the growing belief that control, absolute control, was the only way to avoid being swallowed by the chaos around him. Some men joined the underworld for money, some for power, some for loyalty. Sam joined because it felt like home, but the more he climbed the ladder, the more he realized that even kings in the underworld lived in cages of their own creation. He made his cage out of terror, locking himself inside while convincing everyone else they were the prisoners. And as he watched the snow fall that afternoon, Sam felt the weight of that cage growing heavier. He tried to shake the feeling by returning to one of the clubs later that evening, where smoke and laughter poured through the dimly lit room. People greeted him with forced smiles, respectful nods, and nervous glances. Sam thrived on those reactions. They fueled him. reminded him of his power. But tonight, something felt off. The room felt too loud, the conversations too forced, the faces too familiar. He sat at the bar, resting his arms on the counter. A bartender approached cautiously, keeping his hands steady, waiting for the command. Sam ordered a simple drink, not because he wanted it, but because routine helped quiet the noise in his mind. He stared at the amber liquid, swirling it slowly. The reflection staring back at him looked tired, something he wasn't accustomed to seeing. A man approached him then carefully, respectfully. Not one of his enemies or victims, but a messenger of sorts. Someone who carried information because information could be more dangerous than bullets. He leaned in slightly, speaking in a hushed tone, and told Sam something that sharpened Sam's eyes instantly. Someone had been asking questions about him. Someone outside the usual circles. Not the police, not rivals, but an unpredictable outlier, one of those independent operators who didn't understand the rules of Chicago's underworld. Those kinds of people irritated Sam more than any official threat. They didn't belong to anything, didn't owe allegiance to anyone, and acted without understanding the consequences. Sam smiled at the messenger, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me everything," he said. The man explained that this outsider had been spotted near one of Sam's properties, trying to gather details that were buried for a reason. Sam listened intently, his mind sharpening as the earlier fog lifted. This was something he understood. This was clarity. This was control. When the messenger finished, Sam gave him a small nod of approval. The man exhaled quietly, relieved that Sam's mood hadn't snapped. Sam stood up, his earlier exhaustion evaporating. The moment of vulnerability he experienced in the car faded into the background, replaced by the familiar hum of danger. He left the club, feeling the crisp night air hit his face like a slap of awakening. The city lights flickered in puddles of melted snow as he strode toward his car. His steps grew more purposeful, more deliberate. The outsider who had been snooping had no idea what kind of storm he was inviting into his life. As Sam drove through the icy streets, something inside him hardened again. That strange reflective softness he'd felt earlier retreated deep inside him, replaced by the cold resolve that made him infamous. He didn't like feeling exposed, even to himself. Vulnerability was a luxury he could never afford. It made things messy, uncertain, unpredictable, and unpredictability belonged to others, not him. He decided he would confront the outsider personally, not with violence, at least not at first. Sometimes confrontation began with a simple conversation, a gentle reminder of boundary, a calm warning delivered with a smile that didn't match the threat behind it. Sam could be charming when he wanted to be, almost friendly. But beneath that surface, his patience ran on a short fuse. As he drove, he let his mind piece together the details, forming a picture of the man who dared to step into the shadows without permission. Whoever he was, he had made a mistake. And in Sam's world, mistakes were not forgiven, they were taught, remembered, and paid for. The night grew quieter as Sam approached the neighborhood where the outsider had last been seen. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped out of the car. The air felt sharp, the silence thick. Sam looked around slowly, absorbing the emptiness of the streets. Somewhere nearby, someone had crossed a line, and Sam was there to remind them of the cost. He didn't rush. He moved with the composure of a man who knew the end of the story before it began. He carried himself with the certainty of someone whose power had rarely been challenged. And as he walked deeper into the street's shadows, Sam DeStefano felt the cracks in his mask seal shut once more. He wasn't tired anymore. He wasn't reflective. He was himself again. The Chicago winter watched silently as Sam returned to the role he knew best, the role of a man who understood fear better than anyone alive. The neighborhood Sam entered was the kind of place where buildings leaned toward each other as if sharing secrets. Old brick facades, chipped paint, flickering streetlights, the perfect stage for things that weren't meant to be seen. The cold wind crawled across the pavement, slipping through alleys and rattling loose signs. In most parts of the city, darkness meant safety. Here, darkness meant someone was watching. Sam stepped carefully, not from fear but from intention. Everything he did had purpose. Everything he touched returned something to him: power, fear, obedience. Tonight, he wasn't hunting loudly. He was tracing a disturbance in his world, something small but irritating, like a pebble in a shoe. To most bosses, a lone snooper wouldn't matter. But Sam believed in eliminating problems before they grew roots. He passed a row of shuttered shops, their windows reflecting the dim orange glow of distant lamps. A stray dog wandered across the street, sniffing at a trash can before disappearing behind a dumpster. The world was quiet, too quiet for a city that breathed trouble. That silence told Sam he was close. He reached a corner where a narrow alley cut between two abandoned buildings. Snow had piled in windblown drifts along the edges. Sam paused and crouched down, examining the ground the way a hunter inspects tracks. There were fresh footprints, just one set leading toward the back of the alley. They were uneven, rushed, as if the person walking had been looking over their shoulder. Sam smiled faintly. Fear always left a trail. He followed the prints. The alley's walls closed in, shadows growing thicker with each step. Icicles hung like jagged teeth from fire escapes. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed and echoed like a warning. Sam didn't flinch. At the end of the alley stood a half-collapsed warehouse. A for lease sign hung crooked from the entrance, swaying in the wind. The door was slightly ajar. Sam touched it gently with his fingers and felt the faint vibration of movement inside. Whoever was in there hadn't gotten far. He slipped inside without a sound. The warehouse smelled of rust and old wood. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, creating scattered beams across the floor. Sam paused, letting his eyes adjust. Then he heard the faint scuff of a shoe dragging across concrete, coming from somewhere deeper in the building. So the outsider was still here. Sam walked forward slowly, hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't need a weapon to intimidate someone. His presence alone did the work. As he moved across the dusty floor, his footsteps were too controlled to echo. He looked around the vast, empty space, searching for the shape hidden in the dark corners. A voice finally cracked through the silence. "Who's there?" The words were shaky, uncertain. Not the voice of a tough operator or rival gangster. The outsider sounded scared. Sam almost laughed at how easy this would be. "You've been asking a lot of questions," Sam said calmly, his voice carrying just enough to drift through the darkness. There was a sharp gasp, followed by the sound of someone stepping backward. Sam could picture the man, a low-level investigator, or a reckless drifter, thinking he'd found a story worth chasing. People like that always believed the underworld was romantic, full of secrets and thrills. They didn't understand the weight of real danger until it pressed against them. Sam moved toward the sound. Weaving between old crates and rusted metal shelves, the outsider tried to hide behind a pillar, but his breathing gave him away. "You picked the wrong trail," Sam said, "now just a few feet away. But you already know that." The outsider jumped out from behind the pillar, a small pocket knife shaking in his hand. His movements were clumsy, desperate. Sam didn't step back. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying the man's trembling grip. "That's not going to help you," Sam whispered. The outsider's panic flooded his face. "Stay back. I just needed answers. I wasn't trying to start trouble." Sam took one slow step forward. The blade wavered. "What did you think you'd find?" Sam asked. "Money? Stories? Some dark truth you could sell?" The outsider swallowed hard, knife shaking harder now. "People told me about you, about the things you do. I didn't believe it. I thought it was all exaggeration." Sam smiled slightly. "Most people hope it is." He moved closer, and the outsider stepped back until his shoulders hit the cold wall. His knife was useless now, hanging awkwardly at his side. His eyes darted around, searching for any possible escape. But Sam blocked the only exit with nothing more than his presence. "You should have stayed out of my shadows," Sam said quietly. The outsider squeezed his eyes shut, blurting, "I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'll disappear. I won't ask anything else." Sam took the knife from the man's hand without resistance. He didn't need to threaten him physically. Fear had already stripped the man of whatever courage he had left. Sam stepped back slightly, letting the stranger breathe, not because of mercy, but because he wanted him to absorb the lesson completely. "You walk away tonight," Sam said, tossing the knife aside, "but you never walk toward my world again. Understood?" The outsider nodded quickly, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Say it," Sam instructed softly. I won't come back," the man whispered. "I swear." Sam stepped aside, granting him a small path toward the exit. The man ran, stumbling, slipping, nearly falling. The warehouse door banged open, and cold air rushed in before the outsider disappeared. Into the night, Sam stood there alone, listening to the echo fade. He knew fear would do the rest. The man would vanish from Chicago by morning, driven by the memory of Sam's face in the dim warehouse. Sam didn't always need violence. Sometimes restraint created a ghost that haunted the living far more effectively. He walked to the door, stepping back into the winter night. Snow fell gently across the city, covering fresh footprints, erasing evidence as if the encounter had never happened. Sam brushed frost from his gloves and breathed in the cold air. Disturbance removed, another boundary restored. But as he walked back to his car, he felt something else, a strange tug at the edges of his mind. He had expected aggression from the outsider, or defiance, or foolish bravado. Instead, he found fear. Pure, desperate fear. And something about that vulnerability unsettled him. It was a reminder of something he had buried long ago. A time when he was the one surrounded by shadows, unsure of his next breath. He shook the thought away before it took shape. Sam didn't allow the past to weaken him. He climbed behind the wheel of his car, letting the engine's hum drown the unwanted memory. Chicago stretched before him, A city of secrets and sins. A city he controlled. A city that whispered his name in fear. Tonight he had restored order, and tomorrow he would continue shaping the shadows to his will. The courtroom felt colder than any Chicago winter night, even though the heat inside the building hummed softly through the vents. Somewhere in the distance, a judge's gavel cracked against the wood, a sharp sound that echoed down the hallway like the warning shot of a man you couldn't see but definitely felt. People whispered, shoes scraped against the marble floors, and typewriters clicked in nearby rooms. But in the center of it all, sitting with his hands folded almost politely, was Mad Sam DeStefano, looking as though he belonged there more than the judges, more than the lawyers, more than the system itself. He smiled calmly, the same smile that unsettled even the toughest men in the outfit. A smile that never quite matched the temperature of the room, like a furnace burning behind his ribs. And despite everything, his reputation, the fear that trailed behind him like a shadow, Sam carried himself with the confidence of someone absolutely certain that nothing, not the law nor the government, could ever truly touch him. The case being built around him was considered one of the most dangerous and complicated in Chicago's crime history. Federal prosecutors had tried for years to pin him down with something substantial, something that stuck longer than a brief scare or a technicality, but Sam had a way of slipping through like smoke that refused to be held. Witnesses backed out, evidence seemed to crumble, and entire investigations fell apart before they reached the courtroom. Some said it was intimidation. Others whispered darker theories. But everyone agreed Sam DeStefano had an eerie effect on the justice system itself. This time, though, things looked different. The prosecution had witnesses, they had documents, they had informants willing to come forward. They had men who swore they would testify, men who believed they were finally safe enough, guarded enough, hidden enough to speak against him. And yet, not a soul in the building doubted that those men were afraid in a way that seeped into their bones. Sam leaned back in his hard wooden chair, tapping his thumb slowly against the armrest, watching the way the lawyers scurried across the room with boxes of files, heavy folders, and nervous expressions. To him, it all looked like theater. A performance he had seen many times before. The government tried to paint him as a monster, but Sam believed the real monster were the men pretending to be saints while using the law as a weapon. He saw himself as the honest one in the equation, brutal, yes, but never false. His attorney leaned in, whispering something about strategy, about statements, about the evidence that the prosecutor claimed to have. Sam listened, nodding slowly, but his eyes were elsewhere, drifting lazily up to the large brass scales of justice mounted above the judge's bench. He found the symbol amusing. Balance, fairness, equality. How many people in this city actually believed in those ideas? The scales had never been balanced for anyone he knew, not for the poor, not for the businessmen trying to survive, and certainly not for the gangsters who built half of Chicago's underground economy. What Sam understood better than most was that justice wasn't blind. It simply looked the other way for the right price. The first witness entered the room escorted by marshals. His hands shook, his feet dragged, and his eyes darted around like every shadow carried danger. Sam watched him closely, not with anger, but with a chilling softness, like a father watching an anxious child. The man avoided Sam's gaze, head lowered, shoulders tight. He had once borrowed money from Sam, a small-time gambler who ended up drowning in debt. Sam had tried to collect, but the man panicked, ran to the authorities, and became a federal witness. Now he sat in the box, voice quavering, explaining the loan, the threats, the fear. The prosecutor encouraged him gently, guiding him along. But something strange happened as the witness spoke. The more he talked, the steadier Sam's smile became. Then Sam gently cleared his throat. The witness froze. He didn't look at Sam, but his body stiffened instantly like a string pulled tight inside him. The judge glanced up with irritation, but Sam said nothing after that. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried a message that echoed louder than any words. By the time the witness finished speaking, sweat rolled down his forehead, and his answers had become tangled, contradictory, unreliable. The defense attorney seized on every slip, every inconsistency. The judge began to frown. The prosecutor clenched his jaw, and the witness, he practically wilted under the pressure. One by one, witnesses followed. Men who had sworn they would be strong. Men the prosecutors believed were ready. But when they faced Sam, when their eyes met his strange, unblinking calm, they faltered. Their confidence evaporated. Their memories suddenly blurred. Statements shifted, softened, disappeared. Even the jurors seemed uneasy, watching Sam more than the evidence, studying his reactions, almost magnetically drawn to his silence. The tension that built over the days became a living thing. Reporters gathered outside, scribbling furiously. People whispered in grocery stores and barber shops. Radio hosts debated whether the government could truly bring down a man who seemed untouchable. To some, Sam became a symbol of everything wrong with the justice system. To others, he represented the dark genius of Chicago's underworld, the man who operated by his own rules, outside the reach of ordinary men. On the final day of testimony, the courtroom felt different, as though the building itself sensed the weight of what was about to happen. The prosecutor delivered a fiery argument, pointing at Sam as he accused him of cruelty, manipulation, and violence. He demanded justice for victims and protection for the public. The passion in his voice shook the air. Sam listened quietly, hands still folded, expression unreadable. Then his attorney rose, speaking in a slow, deliberate tone that contrasted sharply with the prosecutor's intensity. He talked about unreliable witnesses, about fear clouding memory, about the government trying to villainize a man based on stories and suspicion rather than hard proof. He reminded the court that emotion was not evidence. When the jury withdrew to deliberate, the room emptied slowly, murmurs rising like static. Sam remained seated, staring at the door they had slipped through, as though he could see the conversation unfolding behind it. Hours passed. Evening crept in. The lights inside flickered softly. Finally, the jury returned. People held their breath. The foreman stood, a slip of paper in his hand, voice trembling as he read the verdict. And just like that, the room exhaled a mixture of shock, disbelief, anger, and relief. Sam didn't smile this time. He didn't smirk or gloat. He simply stood, adjusted his coat, and walked out of the courtroom like a man stepping onto a quiet Chicago street after a long day's work. Outside, the cold air hit his face, but he kept walking, hands in his pockets, confident stride carrying him forward. In his mind, one truth echoed: the law might chase him, but fear always ran faster. The city seemed different at night, as though Chicago itself bent closer to listen to the whispers of men like Sam DeStefano. Streetlights cast pale pools of yellow over wet asphalt, and shadows stretched long along the alleyways, twisting into shapes that could be anything or nothing at all. Sam moved through these streets with a quiet confidence, boots striking the pavement softly, coat collar turned up against the cold. The wind had a sharp bite tonight, but it did little to penetrate the invisible armor he carried around him. Fear wasn't something he felt. Fear was something he wielded. He wasn't out to hunt anyone tonight, not in the sense of a chase, not in the sense of violence. He was out to observe, to understand the ever-shifting chessboard beneath his feet. Even men who feared him did not escape the network. He had built the network of eyes, ears, whispers, and loyalty that extended through every corner of the city. There were certain things only he could see, the subtle threads connecting debts, betrayals, promises, and betrayals yet unspoken. Every alley, every storefront, every shadowed doorway told him something about the people moving through them, about the dangers waiting for those careless enough to wander alone. Tonight, however, there was something different in the air. Whispers, hushed voices carrying down side streets, slurred and trembling, like leaves skittering across a frozen pond. Sam didn't panic. He didn't quicken his step. He slowed, he let the noise guide him. Each sound was a clue, each pause a signal. Somewhere in these alleys, a man or group of men thought they could move unseen, thought they could operate without acknowledging the presence of a force that shaped Chicago in silence and fear. Sam turned a corner sharply and paused at the edge of a narrow passageway. The alley was darker than the main streets, lit only by a single flickering lamp. At the far end, a figure crouched beside a door, hands moving quickly, whispering to someone just out of sight. They weren't careful enough. Sam didn't need to hide. The figure was already revealed, illuminated in part by the fractured light and the crisp clarity of snow reflecting overhead. Their movements, anxious and jerky, betrayed more than words could. This was a man unfamiliar with being watched, unfamiliar with the idea that someone always sees, always knows. Sam's lips curved into a faint smile, not because he was amused, but because he was satisfied. The rules of the streets were simple. You either understood them, or you paid the cost. And tonight, someone had broken the rules. He moved forward silently, boots muffled by snow, coat brushing the brick walls of the alley. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Presence alone was more powerful than any weapon. By the time the figure noticed, Sam was already behind them, his shadow stretching over the backlit doorway like an extension of the darkness itself. The man froze, chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes wide as he realized the truth. Someone had been watching him all along, someone who didn't need to shout, didn't need to threaten. Presence was enough. You shouldn't be here, Sam said softly. Not loud, not dramatic, just calm, deliberate, enough to pierce the nervous tension in the air. The man stumbled backward, tripping over a loose brick. Panic surged, but Sam remained unmoving, calm, controlled. The entire scene was a lesson in fear. He didn't raise his voice, didn't draw a weapon. didn't make a show of violence. He let the anticipation fill the space, let the fear creep in slowly until the man's mind raced ahead of reality. Most men's mistakes aren't punished by fists or guns. They are punished by the knowledge that someone else holds all the power, and that someone is watching every twitch, every heartbeat, every misstep. I didn't. The man stammered, voice cracking, eyes darting desperately around the alley, looking for a place to escape that didn't exist. You didn't what? Sam asked, tilting his head slightly, watching, analyzing. Tell me exactly what you thought you were doing. The man swallowed hard. I was just gathering information for a story. Just someone told me things. I wanted to know if it was true. Sam studied him for a moment, silent. The wind carried the faint smell of wet brick and snow, mingling with the scent of Sam's coat. He could feel the tension radiating from the man, the tiny tremors in his hands and knees. It was intoxicating, not in a cruel way, but in a way that reminded him why he existed. He was the balance between chaos and control. He was the invisible force that kept the city from unraveling completely, or at least from unraveling in ways he couldn't manage. You see, Sam said finally, his voice quiet but precise, information has a price, and some prices are higher than you can imagine. The man's knees went weak, and he sank to the damp ground, shaking. I swear, I didn't mean harm. I just wanted to know. Sam crouched down slowly, bringing his face closer to the man's, not in anger, not in threat, but in a deliberate, measured study of the fear he inspired. You wanted to know, he repeated, but you didn't understand what knowing costs. Every time someone learns what they shouldn't, the world becomes a little more dangerous. And you, he gestured lightly, almost dismissively, you've made yourself part of that danger. The man's eyes welled with tears, though he tried to hide them. Sam watched quietly, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his reputation sink into every fiber of the man's being. He didn't strike. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Fear had already done its work. Every twitch of the man's body, every shallow breath, every tremor spoke volumes. This was how Sam exercised control, through observation, patience, and the quiet assertion of power. Go, Sam said finally. Disappear. Don't follow any threads that lead to me. Don't come back here. And don't think you can return with your curiosity intact. The man scrambled to his feet, nodding rapidly, almost collapsing as he stumbled backward out of the alley. Snow crunched beneath his shoes as he ran blindly into the night, leaving behind the echoes of panic and the faint scent of desperation. Sam watched until he disappeared, then turned and walked back through the alley as silently as he had arrived. The city seemed to breathe around him, indifferent to the moment, unaware that one more man had been imprinted with the lesson Sam had delivered so quietly. He stepped back onto the main street, letting the glow of the lamps illuminate his path. The wind tugged at his coat, the cold biting at his face, but he didn't shiver. His mind was alive with calculations, observations, and the faint, satisfying awareness that another thread in the web of Chicago's underworld had been properly managed. Fear, control, and timing, these were the currencies Sam understood best. And tonight he had traded them wisely. As he walked deeper into the city, shadows stretching long on either side, Sam allowed himself a moment of calm. He didn't speak, didn't think too loudly. He simply moved, a man shaped by violence, fear, and intelligence, walking through a world that would never fully understand him, but always whisper his name in caution, respect, and terror. Chicago's streets never slept, and neither did its whispers. Even when the city seemed quiet, the underworld hummed beneath the surface, invisible to most, but alive to those who understood its pulse. Sam DeStefano moved through that pulse like a shadow, moving through moonlight, silent, deliberate, impossible to ignore. He had learned long ago that control wasn't about brute force alone. Power was a subtle game, played in the spaces between words, in the pauses between threats, in the alliances no one saw forming until they had already solidified. And in that game, loyalty was the most fragile and dangerous currency. He walked into a private club on the south side, a place few ordinary people knew existed. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing warm lamplight, polished wood, and the faint scent of cigars. Inside, men in tailored suits murmured over glasses of amber liquid, eyes flicking toward Sam the moment he entered. Their respect wasn't feigned, it was survival. And survival in this city meant knowing when to submit, when to hide, and when to show teeth. Sam never needed to ask. Presence alone reminded every man in the room who set the rules. At the far end of the room sat an old associate, a man who had been loyal to Sam since the earliest days of his rise. They had seen blood, betrayal, and shattered fortunes together, and yet their bond was complicated, built on mutual respect and the constant awareness that loyalty could vanish in a moment if someone chose betrayal over reason. Sam walked over, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. They exchanged no words at first. In silence, they assessed each other, understanding the state of the network, the condition of their alliances, and the whispers that threatened to unravel carefully constructed agreements. Business has been tense, Sam said finally, voice low and calm. Not anger, not warning, just observation. Rumors are spreading. His associate's eyes narrowed. People always talk. It's nothing you can't handle. Sam smiled faintly. It's never nothing, not when it reaches the wrong ears. The club was private, but information still found ways to slip through. Men who thought themselves clever carried news like contraband, and words traveled faster than any man could walk. Sam understood that fear alone could only protect so much. Loyalty, respect, and calculated threats kept the balance, and when a crack appeared, it had to be fixed immediately. You've noticed, the associate continued, leaning back, that some men are wavering, not afraid, but uncertain, thinking of stepping aside, maybe switching sides. Sam's eyes darkened slightly, the faintest shadow passing over his features. He had built his empire on fear, yes, but fear alone wasn't sufficient to ensure obedience. Men were clever, dangerous in their own right, and quick to exploit opportunity. The moment someone felt untouchable, chaos began to creep in. That is why alliances, promises, and whispers of consequence had to move faster than fear could dissipate. Timing was everything. Sam took a slow sip from his glass, savoring the warmth as it touched his throat. He liked control, but he also understood patience. Not every problem needed immediate confrontation. Some required careful observation, a calculated pause, a precise strike when the moment demanded it. And loyalty, the fickle loyalty of men, was often tested most effectively in the spaces between actions, in the silent intimidation of presence rather than spectacle. We need to remind them, Sam said finally, placing his glass down gently. Not with violence, not yet, with clarity. Boundaries, the kind that leave no doubt where their choice is laid. The associate nodded slowly, understanding. Violence could always be applied later, but first came awareness, subtle and thorough. Fear worked best when it was reinforced by knowledge, by the understanding that any misstep, any betrayal, any hesitation carried immediate consequences, even if not yet visible. Sam's genius wasn't in killing the disloyal. It was in teaching them the cost of disloyalty without ever striking. Every man he controlled carried the lesson in his mind, and that lesson was reinforced every time Sam moved through the city. Every time his eyes fell on them, every time his presence reminded them of what awaited if they crossed a line. Sam left the club later that evening, stepping back into the streets as the city stretched before him like a living map of influence and risk. Each shadow, each flicker of movement, each quiet footstep carried meaning. He knew the men who owed him, the men who feared him, the men who wanted him gone. And he knew that maintaining control meant balancing all of them like pieces on a board that could never be replaced, only repositioned. The wind tugged at his coat, but Sam moved through it effortlessly. He thought about the man he had confronted the night before, the one who had dared to gather information. Fear had done its job, but loyalty required more than fear. Men must understand the permanence of their decisions. Every whisper, every rumor, every misstep had to be addressed before it could fester into betrayal. That was the core of control, prevention, not reaction. He had built his empire on that principle, and it had served him well. He walked down an alley toward one of his properties, a small warehouse converted into an office and storage for operation. It wasn't ostentatious. Sam didn't need ostentation to command respect. The building's walls had absorbed decades of Chicago tension, every secret kept within them reinforcing the authority of the man who owned it. As he entered, the familiar smell of old wood, rusted metal, and cigar smoke greeted him, grounding him in a space that was both home and fortress. Inside, a few trusted men waited, seated around a table with ledgers and small stacks of documents. They looked up as Sam entered, offering nods of acknowledgement rather than words. They knew that the most important communication often came without speech. Sam walked past them, glancing at the records, absorbing the state of business without touching a pen or demanding explanations. He trusted in observation, in understanding the rhythm of his operations, in the quiet but deliberate knowledge of who was loyal and who teetered on the edge. Report, he said finally, voice calm, deliberate. One man spoke, detailing the movement of shipments, payments collected, and potential threats in the network. Another mentioned rumors of a new rival attempting to establish influence in a distant part of the city. Sam listened, absorbing every detail without interruption, cataloging each piece of information like a conductor hearing every note in a symphony. Timing, he knew, would dictate the next steps. Actions were measured, precise, and informed by loyalty as much as by threat. After the report, Sam leaned back, eyes distant for a moment. The city's pulse thrummed, beyond the walls chaotic, relentless, alive, and he, in his silent mastery, moved in perfect synchrony with that pulse. He was not the loudest, not the most violent, but the most deliberate. Fear alone had carried him far, but loyalty, carefully managed and cultivated, ensured that his influence would persist beyond fear alone. He stood and walked toward the window, looking down at the streets below. Men moved through the city unaware of the invisible strings, unaware of the consequences that could fall upon them at a single miscalculated step. Sam thought about the delicate balance he maintained, the loyalty he nurtured, the fear he instilled, and the knowledge that all of it could unravel if he ever faltered. But falter he would not. Never. Not while he drew breath. Not while Chicago itself bent to his quiet, unyielding will. In the silence of the office, surrounded by men who would never betray him, not willingly, Sam DeStefano felt the strange satisfaction of order restored. Loyalty, fear, timing, each element accounted for, each piece in place. And as he stepped back into the night later, walking through streets glistening with ice and reflecting the glow of the city, he carried the certainty of a man who understood the most dangerous truth of all: control was never given. It was taken, maintained, and carefully, meticulously protected. The streets of Chicago at night carried a language few could understand. It wasn't the honking of cars or the shuffle of boots against wet asphalt. It was subtler and unspoken rhythm, a set of invisible rules. A current that flowed through alleys, clubs, and warehouses alike. Sam DeStefano moved within that current effortlessly. He didn't need to shout, brandish weapons, or make threats. His power was in presence, in observation, in the quiet insistence that he was always watching, always aware, always calculating. Every man in the city knew this, even if they only sensed it subconsciously. Tonight, the wind carried a sharper edge, cutting through the narrow streets and slipping under coat collars. Sam's boots tapped against the frozen pavement, deliberate, steady, echoing faintly off the brick walls. He didn't rush. There was no need. He had learned over the years that time was a tool and patience a weapon. Immediate action could reveal weakness. A delayed strike, calculated and precise, left no doubt in the minds of those who might challenge him. He approached a small, abandoned storefront in the industrial district, a place that had once served as a meeting point for low-level operators, now scattered or eliminated. The windows were boarded up, and snow had drifted against the walls, leaving no trace of previous footprints. Sam paused, scanning the surroundings, his eyes catching the slightest glimmer of movement and intentional imperfection in the city's stillness. Someone had been here. Someone had tested the boundaries, intentionally or not. And testing boundaries in Sam's world was a dangerous gamble. Inside, the building smelled of rust and decay, a familiar scent that reminded him of the warehouses where he had spent years consolidating control over the underworld. He moved through the darkness, silently navigating the debris, the echoes of footsteps behind him, carefully calculated to be louder than necessary, signaling power without exposure. His mind cataloged every detail: the uneven floorboards, the displaced crates, the faint scratch marks along the walls. Each was a clue. Each spoke of presence, intent, and error. He came to a small corner where shadows pulled thickly. There, a man crouched, trying to remain unseen. Sam didn't speak. Immediately, he let the silence grow, heavy and suffocating, until the man's movements betrayed him. Fear was audible, and Sam could read it like an open book. He didn't approach aggressively. He didn't need to. The air itself carried the message that he was near, and the man knew it. Every instinct screamed at him that danger was present, that the moment to flee or submit had arrived. "You shouldn't be here," Sam said finally, voice calm, deliberate, almost conversational. The man flinched, realizing too late that he had been spotted long before the words had been spoken. He scrambled backward, only to trip over a broken plank, his body collapsing onto the cold floor. Sam's expression didn't change. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He simply observed, letting the weight of his presence settle over the man like a thick, inescapable fog. I didn't mean anything," the man stammered, voice cracking, eyes darting frantically around the room. I was just trying to find something." Sam leaned slightly forward, studying him. "And what exactly were you hoping to find?" His tone was calm, almost gentle, but it carried an invisible edge, the kind of edge that reminded men who wielded knives or gathered rumors that some predators didn't need weapons. The threat was inherent in Sam's silence as much as his words. The man's hands shook, and the knife he had been holding slipped from his grip, unnoticed, forgotten in the immediate, primal panic. "Information," the man admitted, voice trembling. I thought I just needed to know if the stories were true." Sam nodded slowly, as if considering this carefully. "Stories," he said. "Stories have a cost. You don't get to know them without paying for them." The man's breath quickened, and he sank further into the corner, trying to make himself smaller, less visible, less significant. But Sam's presence negated invisibility. Fear had long since replaced tragedy, courage, and thought. The man's movements betrayed a desperate awareness that he was exposed completely and that there was no escape that didn't carry consequence. You see, Sam continued, voice low, deliberate. You've entered a world that isn't forgiving, not for curiosity, not for ambition, not for mistakes. Every choice here has a weight, and every action echoes farther than you can imagine. The man's lips trembled. Please, I won't come back. I won't interfere. I just wanted answers. Sam straightened, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Good. You'll remember this night. Remember it clearly, and then you'll disappear. If you fail to remember, or if you think you can test the rules again, consequences will follow, quietly, surely, and without hesitation. He stepped back, allowing the man a path toward the door. Not mercy, but strategy. Lessons were best learned without unnecessary spectacle. The man staggered to his feet, knees weak, and stumbled out into the snow-covered night, leaving behind the echo of fear that would cling to him for days, weeks, perhaps a lifetime. Sam didn't follow. He didn't need to. He had made his point. The alley was silent again. The kind of silence that only a city like Chicago could maintain after its underworld had been reminded of the invisible forces at work. Sam moved back into the main streets, snow crunching underfoot. Coat collar turned up, breath-forming clouds in the cold air. The city was alive, as it always was, filled with people who were unaware of the intricate networks of power, influence, and fear weaving around them. But Sam was aware. He always was. That awareness was his advantage. That awareness kept him alive. That awareness allowed him to navigate, manipulate, and survive where others stumbled blindly. As he walked, he thought about the lessons loyalty demanded, the attention to detail fear required, and the patience the game of survival demanded. Violence was simple. Control was complex. Sam had spent a lifetime learning the difference, and he had mastered it. Every whisper, every shadow, every hesitant glance told him more than any testimony, any report, or any confession could. Observation was the key, and tonight he had observed, and the city had remembered. He eventually paused near a familiar street corner, one he had walked countless times in the past. The lamplight cast long, fractured shadows, painting the pavement in a mosaic of light and dark. Sam inhaled deeply, feeling the night settle around him like a cloak. Every alley, every street, every corner carried its own story, its own danger, and its own lesson. And in all of it he moved like a master, unseen yet omnipresent, a quiet force shaping the world in ways most people couldn't even perceive. Tonight, there was no blood, no spectacle, no outcry. There was only calculated silence. And in that silence, Sam DeStefano ruled Chicago's underworld with a power that required no recognition, no applause, and no justification. Presence, patience, and precision, these were his weapons. And in the quiet of the night, they were enough. The city never forgave mistakes, and Sam DeStefano knew that better than anyone. Chicago's streets were a mirror, reflecting every misstep, every miscalculation, every fleeting lapse in judgment. Even the smallest ripple could become a wave capable of sweeping men away if they weren't careful. Sam walked along the narrow sidewalks of the South Side, boots crunching softly against the frost that had settled overnight, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. There was no urgency in his pace, only purpose. Every step was measured, every breath deliberate. He had learned that decisions, once made, carried weight that could crush or elevate, depending on timing, foresight, and subtle manipulation. Earlier that week, a series of small disturbances had reached his ears. Men who had once shown loyalty now wavered. Rumors spread that someone outside the established network was attempting to influence them, promising wealth, power, or protection in exchange for obedience. Sam didn't react immediately. He never did. Instead, he cataloged, observed, and calculated. A hasty move could alert these men that they had leverage or weakness. Patience, he reminded himself, was more dangerous than any weapon in his arsenal. As he passed a dimly lit intersection, the faint sound of voices caught his attention. Not ordinary voices, they carried hesitation, tension, the kind of murmur that suggested men were speaking about matters they didn't fully understand. He paused, letting the city swallow him into its quiet rhythm. His presence alone unnoticed, yet omnipresent, was enough to instill awareness in those nearby. For the men whose loyalty teetered, the sensation of being observed was more powerful than any threat. Fear could enforce obedience, but subtlety ensured permanence. Sam moved on, approaching one of his warehouses on the edge of the district. It wasn't lavish or ostentatious, but it served its purpose, a nexus for operations, a place to manage resources. and a reminder to his men that their world was contained within his reach. Inside, he found a handful of trusted associates reviewing ledgers, maps, and small stacks of correspondence. Their expressions brightened slightly as he entered, but there was no false relief. These men knew better than to mistake presence for weakness or leniency. They had learned over the years that Sam's calm was never idle. Every motion, every word, every gesture carried meaning. "Reports," Sam said softly, his voice even, controlled. No urgency, no demand, simply observation. One by one, the men spoke, delivering news about shipments, collection, and potential threats from outside forces attempting to sway loyalty. Sam listened, absorbing the information without interruption. Each word, each inflection, each hesitation told him as much as the content itself. There were no coincidences in these reports, only choices made by men who either understood their place or tested it. After listening carefully, Sam stood and walked toward a window, looking out at the darkened streets beyond. Snow had begun to fall again, coating the city in a thin layer of white, softening edges, hiding imperfection. In the quiet of this moment, he considered the weight of decisions, the choices he would have to make in the coming days. Punishment could be swift, but it was not always necessary. Some lessons were more enduring when delivered subtly, when the consequences lingered light. A shadow, reminding men that loyalty was never optional, only earned and maintained. He thought of those who had whispered promises of defection, who had been enticed by outsiders offering wealth or protection. They were clever, ambitious, and dangerous but reckless. Sam understood ambition. He had built his reputation, his empire, from the ground up using the same hunger that drove these men. What they lacked was perspective. They failed to recognize the full scope of consequence, the unseen hand that shaped their fates. Decisions without foresight, he knew, were like seeds planted in frozen soil. They might sprout, but they would never endure. Later, he walked along the perimeter of his territory, a slow circuit through streets lined with warehouses, small shops, and alleys that bore the marks of countless encounters. He observed the city with the meticulous focus of a man who knew that even the smallest irregularity could indicate a larger threat. A delivery truck that didn't belong, a shadow moving too quickly, a face unfamiliar. In a familiar crowd, each anomaly was a piece of a puzzle he needed to understand. The city had its rhythm, and Sam knew it as intimately as a musician knows a melody. Disruptions could be managed, contained, or exploited, but only if decisions were precise, calculated, and deliberate. He paused at a corner where two alleys converged, considering the unseen consequence of his next moves. Each decision he made rippled outward, affecting men who depended on him, feared him, or both. Loyalty was fragile, but fear without guidance was unstable. He needed balance, measured reminders, subtle lessons, and the occasional unmistakable demonstration of authority. Men had to understand not only the immediate cost of missteps, but the enduring weight of being part of a network they could never fully control. That knowledge ensured obedience, not through blind terror alone, but through recognition of the structure he had built and maintained. Inside one of the warehouses, he gathered a small group of men who had shown wavering loyalty. There was no accusation, no shouting, no overt threat. Instead, Sam spoke quietly, his tone measured, deliberate, authoritative. He reminded them of past lessons, of favors extended, of debts repaid, of consequences both avoided and enforced. He spoke of trust, the importance of consistency, and the fragility of position in a city where power could shift in a single night. His words were not loud, but they carried a weight that settled in the room like a tangible presence. Every man in that space understood the implications. Every man left with the unspoken acknowledgement that their choices were observed, recorded, and evaluated. Later, as the night deepened, Sam walked alone along the frozen streets, snowflakes melting against his coat, the cold pressing against his skin. He thought about the decisions he had made, the subtle maneuvers, the quiet enforcement of loyalty. He reflected on the intricate balance between fear and respect, control and freedom. Each decision, he knew, was a reflection of not just the present moment, but the legacy he would leave in the streets of Chicago. Every whisper carried potential, every glance suggested consequence, and every step forward demanded calculation. By the time he returned to his private apartment, high above the city streets, Sam understood that the weight of decision was constant. It never lifted. There was no respite. The city would continue to move, men would continue to falter, and threats would always emerge. But the weight was his to bear, and he bore it as he always had, with precision, calm, and an unflinching understanding of the consequences his choices would exact. Chicago was a city of shadows, and he was both a master of those shadows and a force that reminded the living of the cost to every action, every loyalty, every mistake. Chicago at night was a living entity, and Sam DeStefano had learned how to navigate its streets like a shadow moving silently through moonlight. The The city pulsed with whispers, secrets, and unspoken agreements. Every alley, every corner, every streetlight carried messages that only those attuned to the rhythm could understand. Sam was always attuned. He moved without haste, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes scanning the dimly lit streets, observing the faintest twitch of movement or flicker of expression that might indicate disruption, disloyalty, or opportunity. Tonight he had a particular purpose. A new player had entered the periphery of his territory, someone ambitious, reckless, and unaware of the rules that governed the world beneath the city's surface. Sam had heard the rumors through his network of informants, men who owed him allegiance as well as fear. The newcomer was testing the waters, trying to assert influence where it did not belong. And such mistakes, Sam had learned, needed correction not merely to punish but to demonstrate. The order he maintained, the invisible boundaries that controlled everything within his reach. He moved through a narrow alleyway, boots silent against the cracked pavement. Snow had begun to fall lightly, coating the ground in a thin white layer. The quiet gave him advantage. Noise was the enemy of subtlety, and silence was the messenger of power. Each step he took was deliberate, measured, a statement without words. The city seemed to bend around him. Or perhaps it was merely that he had learned to read its pulse so clearly that every movement, every whisper was predictable and manageable. At the far end of the alley, he observed a figure crouched near a shipment of crates. The man was tense, nervous, clearly attempting to conceal his presence while taking stock of the area. Sam didn't approach hastily. Instead, he leaned against a nearby wall, letting the shadows cloak him as he watched. Fear was the most effective tool, but it required precision. Too much force could provoke recklessness. Too little could invite disobedience. The man's own uncertainty amplified the lesson. Before any confrontation had even begun. "You've been busy," Sam said softly, his voice calm and unhurried, carrying over just enough distance to reach the man without giving away his exact position. The figure stiffened, eyes darting toward the source of the voice. Recognition came too late. Presence alone had betrayed him. His body went rigid, a wave of panic spreading from his chest to his fingers, and the knife he had been clutching trembled in his grasp. I'm not doing anything," the man stammered, voice cracking under the weight of fear. "I was just checking supplies, making sure." "Checking what?" Sam asked, stepping lightly out of the shadows, closer but still deliberate, controlled. Every movement calculated to convey authority without the need for aggression. The man's gaze flicked nervously, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Every instinct screamed that he had trespassed into a world where mistakes were costly and observation was absolute. "I heard someone said there were issues. I wanted to verify," the man replied, swallowing hard. Sweat glistened along his temple, and his hands shook with tension. His voice wavered under the pressure of being observed by someone who could see, understand, and manipulate his every reaction. Sam's calm presence amplified the fear, proving that knowledge without context could be more powerful than any physical threat. Sam studied him for a moment, tilting his head slightly, observing the panic that played across the man's features. "You understand what happens when boundaries are crossed," he said finally, low and deliberate. "You've entered a world where loyalty, obedience, and awareness aren't optional. Curiosity is dangerous. Ambition without understanding is fatal." The man's knees went weak, and he sank slightly, almost collapsing under the weight of recognition. I understand. I won't interfere. I'll leave, I promise." Sam didn't move closer, didn't raise his voice, didn't display anger. He didn't need to. Fear had already done its work. Men remembered not only through punishment, but through the quiet, unmistakable presence of someone who had the ability to end their world in a single motion, or with a single observation. The threat was inherent, implicit, and enduring. The man nodded rapidly, relief and terror warring across his face, understanding the lesson without further demonstration. "Good," Sam said finally. "Disappear. Make sure your absence is complete. Any deviation, any attempt to return, will not be tolerated." He stepped aside, allowing the man a clear path to leave, reinforcing the idea that obedience could be achieved without spectacle, without necessary aggression, but with undeniable authority. The man stumbled backward, over the uneven ground, and bolted into the night, leaving behind the echoes of fear that would linger long after he was gone. Sam remained in the alley for a moment, observing the tracks left in the snow, noting the patterns, the impressions. Even in small actions, the consequences of choice could be measured. The city seemed to exhale around him, a quiet acknowledgement that the lesson had been delivered, that order had been restored, that the invisible boundaries of control had been reaffirmed. The new player would think twice before attempting to assert influence again. Others would hear the whispers, even if they didn't see the confrontation firsthand. Reputation, cultivated carefully over decades, reinforced loyalty and compliance in ways violence alone could not achieve. He walked back onto the main streets, letting the faint glow of streetlight illuminate the path. His breath forming clouds in the cold night air. The city was alive with movement, but its rhythm was predictable to him. Every man, every action, every sound carried information. He cataloged it, measured it, and stored it for future decisions. The balance of fear and respect was delicate, maintained through observation, precision, and calculated silence. Later, he returned to his private quarters, high above the city streets, overlooking the expanse of Chicago's darkened skyline. Snowflakes drifted lazily against the windows, reflecting the dim glow of distant streetlights. He stood quietly, letting the weight of influence and the responsibility of control settle over him. Decisions had consequences. Loyalty had value. Fear had utility. And in the delicate interplay of these forces, Sam DeStefano had mastered the art of power. Tonight, no blood was spilled, no violence enacted. Only presence, observation, and subtle assertion of control had been required. The city, ever unpredictable, had been reminded that Sam moved through its shadows with absolute awareness. Every choice, every whisper, every step taken by those under his domain carried a silent acknowledgement that their world was not their own. It belonged to the one who could navigate it completely, quietly, and without hesitation. And in that quiet mastery, Sam continued to shape Chicago's underworld in ways that were invisible, yet undeniably powerful. The city was quieter than usual that night, but Sam DeStefano knew better than to trust silence. Chicago's underworld had a rhythm all its own, subtle, intricate, and dangerous, and it never truly slept. Every alley, every shadow, every flickering street lamp told a story to those who could read it. Sam moved through these streets with a measured confidence, coat collar turned up against the biting wind, boots crunching softly against frost-coated pavement. Each step he took was deliberate, a statement of presence without ostentation, a reminder that he was always watching, always calculating, always several moves ahead of anyone daring enough to challenge him. He thought about the delicate architecture of his influence, the network he had constructed with painstaking care over the years. It was more than fear. It was a web of loyalty, observation, and calculated consequences. Men owed him obedience, not only because of what he could do to them, but because they understood what he could see. Trust was fragile, and he knew that even those closest to him could be swayed by ambition, desperation, or curiosity. The art of maintaining control was not brute force alone. It was patience, subtlety, and the precision of a predator who could strike or retreat at exactly the right moment. As he approached the warehouse district on the south side, he noted the familiar structures, the silent sentinels of brick and steel. Each building contained a story, a lesson, a record of his influence. Men who had tried to undermine him had vanished quietly, leaving behind whispers that spread faster than any gunshot. Sam didn't rely on fear for spectacle. He relied on the unseen reinforcement of order. Those who disobeyed learned that consequences were inevitable, yet unpredictable. This unpredictability ensured compliance, loyalty, and respect in equal measure. Inside one of the warehouses, a group of trusted lieutenants waited. They were a small assembly handpicked for reliability and discretion. Sam moved among them without a word at first, observing faces, posture, subtle reactions. Every detail conveyed information: confidence, anxiety, deception, or honesty. He had no need for interrogation. Presence and attention revealed everything. Their loyalty was a delicate balance, reinforced by the awareness that Sam was never far from any thread that connected them. Never unaware of any disturbance, never hesitant in enforcing rules. Report, he said finally, voice low and measured. Each man spoke in turn, delivering updates on shipments, collections, and the movements of rival interests. Sam absorbed the information with practiced focus, cataloging not just the words but the pauses, the hesitation, the unspoken truths lurking beneath. The underworld was a place where small mistakes carried enormous consequences, and Sam had built his empire on understanding those mistakes before they could threaten him. His mind worked like a chessboard, analyzing each move, predicting reactions, and weighing every potential outcome. Loyalty was not assumed. It was earned, maintained, and, when necessary, reminded. After reviewing the reports, he stepped toward a corner where a dim lamp cast long shadows across crates and dust-covered surfaces. He thought about the newcomers encroaching on his territory, the men who had wavered in their allegiance, and the unpredictable forces that occasionally appeared from outside his carefully constructed world. Influence was fragile. Fear could enforce obedience temporarily, but loyalty required subtle, sustained effort. Sam understood this better than anyone, and he had long ago mastered the balance between the two. Later, he walked along the perimeter of his holdings, patrolling the streets like a sentinel, though no one could see him. The snow had begun to fall heavier, muffling sound and softening edges, making the city appear calm, serene even, but Sam knew better. The calmness was an illusion, a fragile veneer over a city, teeming with ambition, greed, and danger. Every alleyway, every shadow, every flicker of light could hide a threat or an opportunity. Observation was his most powerful weapon, and patience was his ally. He didn't rush, he didn't need to. The city moved in predictable patterns for those who could read it, and Sam had long since learned to read every detail with precision. As he moved deeper into the district, he came across a man loitering near one of the warehouses. At first glance, the figure seemed casual, perhaps insignificant, but Sam noticed the tension in the shoulders, the way the eyes darted too frequently, the subtle hesitation in every gesture. He slowed, allowing the man to become aware of his presence, without revealing himself completely. Fear, applied without force, was the most potent lesson of all. The man stiffened, glance flicking over his shoulder, searching for the unseen observer. Presence alone could enforce obedience faster than a gun or a fist. "You shouldn't be here," Sam said finally, voice low, calm, controlled. The words carried not threat but certainty. The man froze completely, body tense, understanding instantly that he had trespassed into a world he could not navigate. Panic overtook thought. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet there was no escape. The city itself seemed to close in, as if acknowledging the authority that had claimed these streets long ago. I didn't," the man began, voice trembling, but the words faltered. Sam's quiet observation was sufficient to strip confidence, leaving only raw awareness of consequence. He didn't step closer. He didn't need to. Control had already been established. Every twitch, every breath, every hesitation reinforced the lesson. Boundaries in Sam DeStefano's world were absolute. "Leave," he said finally. "Disappear and remember tonight. Curiosity has a cost, and in this city, ignorance can be fatal." The man bolted, stumbling over the uneven ground, leaving behind the unmistakable imprint of fear that would endure far longer than any story told about the encounter. Sam allowed him to disappear into the shadows, satisfied that the lesson had been learned without spectacle. This was how he maintained control, not through continuous violence, but through strategic, deliberate reinforcement of order. The web of influence he had spun extended invisibly through every corner of Chicago. Each thread carefully observed, each connection accounted for, every ripple in the network acknowledged and controlled. Returning to his headquarters later, Sam reflected on the delicate balance of power. Influence required constant attention, observation, and understanding. Fear alone was insufficient. Loyalty demanded cultivation, subtle guidance, and reinforcement. Men had to be aware that their choices mattered, that deviation carried consequence, and that obedience was as much a matter of understanding as it was of compliance. Every whisper, every movement, every shadow contributed to the maintenance of this fragile equilibrium. From his window overlooking the city, Sam watched the snowfall, blanketing the streets, softening the chaos below. The city moved, alive with ambition and danger, but he had mastered its rhythm. Observation, patience, and strategic fear ensured his dominance, and the delicate web of power he had built remained intact. He understood that control was never given, it was claimed, maintained, and protected with unflinching vigilance. And in that understanding, Sam DeStefano continued to shape Chicago's underworld, silent, deliberate, and absolute. The night carried an almost tangible weight, a quiet heaviness that settled over Chicago like a blanket of snow. Sam DeStefano walked through streets that had long been mapped into his mind, not with paper or ink, but with observation, memory, and instinct. Every alley, corner, and shadow was a potential message, potential threat, or an opportunity to reinforce the delicate balance of loyalty, fear, and influence he maintained. He didn't hurry. His boots made soft, deliberate sounds against the frozen pavement, echoing faintly, but not enough to announce his approach. Presence, after all, was often more effective than spectacle. He paused near the entrance of a small club, tucked into the heart of the South Side. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting fractured light across the walls and pavement. Inside, men who thought themselves clever whispered over drinks, discussing movements, rumors, and promises. Sam didn't enter. Observation was more powerful than participation, and his eyes could see what they could not. Every gesture, every glance, every slight shift of posture revealed allegiance, uncertainty, and ambition. He cataloged it all. A mental ledger of influence and risk. Earlier that week, whispers had reached him of a man who had begun questioning the chain of command, testing boundaries, and seeking advantage in places where he had no right. Sam didn't need to act immediately. Timing was crucial. He understood the art of silent enforcement, of letting fear, respect, and awareness converge to ensure compliance without dramatic display. He moved instead as a shadow within the environment, a constant reminder that deviation carried consequence, a presence that required no words to instill dread. As he moved along a quieter street, he noticed a figure lingering near a warehouse, someone unfamiliar, yet nervous, yet attempting to seem casual. Sam slowed, letting his presence be sensed rather than revealed. The man's posture stiffened, his hands twitching ever so slightly, betraying the internal panic that his mind attempted to suppress. In the quiet of the night, fear spoke louder than any shout. The anticipation of observation, the invisible weight of authority, was a more powerful tool than a gun or a fist. Sam had learned this early, and he wielded it with precision. "You shouldn't be here," Sam said finally, his voice calm, measured, deliberate. The man froze, eyes wide, searching the shadows, heart racing. Presence alone had revealed the truth that he had trespassed into a world beyond his understanding. Panic coursed through him, subtle yet intense, the kind of fear that stripped rational thought and replaced it with instinctive compliance. I'm just checking I didn't," the man stammered, voice faltering under the weight of realization. Every breath, every movement betrayed him. Sam didn't step closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Observation alone enforced obedience. The man understood in that moment that deviation was dangerous, curiosity was costly, and boundaries in Sam DeStefano's world were absolute. "Leave," Sam said finally. "Disappear. And remember what you learned here. Any deviation, any attempt to return, will carry consequences beyond your understanding." The man nodded rapidly, knees trembling, and bolted into the shadows. Sam allowed him to disappear without pursuit. The lesson had been delivered. Fear, when paired with awareness and precision, created permanence. Spectacle could reinforce it, but was rarely necessary. Every man who left that encounter would carry the lesson forward, not just the man he confronted, but others who heard whispers of the incident. Reputation, built over years of careful action, ensured obedience without the constant need for violence. Sam continued along the street, boots crunching softly in the thin layer of snow, thinking about the intricate architecture of control he maintained. Fear was a tool, loyalty a necessity, and observation the foundation of authority. He moved like a living node within the network, connecting threads of influence, monitoring movement, and predicting potential disruption. Every decision, every step, every word was calculated to reinforce the delicate equilibrium of power he had spent years establishing. Later, he arrived at one of his warehouses, a modest structure that served as both office and operational center. Inside, a few trusted men waited with reports, ledgers, and updates from the surrounding territory. They spoke in hushed tones, aware that the most effective communication often lay in nuance rather than volume. Sam listened carefully, absorbing details, noting hesitation, detecting unspoken truths. Each report was not only information but also an opportunity to measure loyalty, gauge ambition, and anticipate a potential disruption. After reviewing the updates, he stepped back and observed the men silently. There was no need for immediate enforcement. Observation alone maintained order, as it had countless times before. The city outside was alive with potential threats, rival interests, and the constant shuffle of those seeking advantage. But Sam's awareness was comprehensive. The web he had constructed extended invisibly, reaching into every alley, every club, every shipment. The balance of fear, respect, and loyalty ensured that no single disturbance could grow unchecked. Later, in the quiet of his office, Sam considered the responsibilities his influence carried. Control was never static. It required constant attention, evaluation, and subtle enforcement. Men tested boundaries, tempted fate, and underestimated consequences, but Sam had learned to anticipate every deviation. The power he wielded was quiet, strategic, and absolute. It was not defined by spectacle or notoriety, but by the precise orchestration of influence, observation, and calculated intervention. Each man in his network, every whisper of rumor, every small deviation was accounted for. Order was maintained through presence as much as action, through subtle enforcement as much as through confrontation. As he looked out over the city streets blanketed in snow, Sam understood that enforcement could be silent, invisible, and yet undeniably effective. Men feared what they could not see fully but knew existed. Obedience was secured not by constant violence, but by the constant awareness that it could manifest at any moment. His empire rested on this principle, power exercised with precision, patience, and insight. He did not need to dominate through force alone. His authority was inherent, inescapable, and self-reinforcing. Tonight, there was no blood spilled, no cries echoing through the streets, no immediate spectacle to demonstrate power. And yet, the city had been reminded of who controlled its unseen corners. Through observation, patience, and the silent enforcement of boundaries, Sam DeStefano continued to shape Chicago's underworld. Each step he took, each man he passed, each shadow he traversed reinforced a reality in which obedience, respect, and fear were inseparable. Control was not merely maintained, it was lived, breathed, and executed with unflinching precision. And in the stillness of the night, with snow falling softly against the darkened city, Sam moved through The streets like a living embodiment of the silent force that ruled all beneath the surface. The underworld listened, watched, and understood. His presence alone was the ultimate reminder that order, loyalty, and consequence were never negotiable. And that deviation came at a cost measured not in spectacle but in certainty. Chicago's night had a rhythm, subtle and insidious, like the soft hiss of steam escaping from underground pipes. Sam DeStefano walked through streets blanketed in frost, coat collar turned up, hands tucked into pockets, eyes scanning the quiet intersections and narrow alleys. The city seemed still, but he knew better. The stillness was a mask. Beneath it, whispers moved, ambition stirred, and shadows concealed men eager to test boundaries, challenge authority, or stake a claim where they had no right. Sam had spent decades learning to detect the faintest vibrations of such threats, and to respond with a precision that left no room for error. He'd approached one of his warehouses on the outskirts of his territory, a modest brick building whose exterior told nothing of the operations inside. The structure was a hub of activity, though it remained hidden from the eyes of the ordinary citizen. Men who worked there understood the rules, respect the hierarchy, follow orders, and never step beyond the invisible lines that defined the balance of power. Sam's authority was silent but unmistakable, and each man in the building was aware that his presence could be felt at any time, even when he was nowhere to be seen. Inside, a few trusted lieutenants were gathered around a table with maps, ledgers, and reports. They paused as Sam entered, standing in the doorway with a calm authority that filled the room without a word. The man had learned long ago that his silence carried more weight than any raised voice, that a single glance could communicate volumes, and that a single word could decide the fate of operations, reputations, or even lives. Sam observed them carefully, noting not just the accuracy of their reports, but the subtlety in their tone, the hesitation in their expressions, the weight of unspoken concerns. Everything mattered. Nothing escaped his attention. "Tell me what you found," he said finally, voice low, deliberate, and even. His question was simple, but the expectation was total comprehension, precise reporting, and recognition of the gravity of the information. Each man spoke, recounting movements of shipments, changes in alliances, and rumors of a new player attempting to influence men who had been under Sam's control. The details were mundane to the untrained ear, but Sam's mind cataloged them with absolute clarity, connecting threads, anticipating reactions, and identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited or neutralized. As he listened, Sam's thoughts wandered to the delicate art of maintaining control in a world teeming with ambition and deceit. Fear was a tool, yes, but loyalty was essential. Men could be guided by terror, but true obedience required understanding, recognition of consequences, and the subtle reinforcement of hierarchy. Those who sought to challenge him often underestimated the patience and insight that governed his decisions. They believed power could be seized with a single bold act. But Sam knew better. Influence was a network, invisible and interwoven. And every move had to be anticipated, every response measured, every consequence understood. After reviewing the reports, Sam walked to the far corner of the warehouse where a faint light illuminated the floorboards, casting long shadows that flickered with movement. He considered the unseen threats that lurked at the edges of his domain, the ambitious newcomers, the wavering associates, the opportunists who tested boundaries without understanding the consequences. Each was a potential disruption, but also an opportunity to reinforce his authority. Every interaction, every observation, every silent intervention contributed to the equilibrium he maintained. Control was not static. It required constant attention, vigilance, and precise execution. Later, he stepped outside, letting the cold night air fill his lungs as he walked along the perimeter of his property. Snow had begun to fall lightly, muffling the distant sounds of traffic, creating an illusion of serenity. But Sam's mind was alert to every irregularity, a shadow that moved too quickly, a door that creaked in the wind, the faint echo of voices in the distance. Each anomaly was a clue, a signal, a reminder that the world beneath the city's surface was alive, unpredictable, and dangerous. Observation was more powerful than action, and patience was more potent than aggression. He moved like a predator attuned to the rhythm of prey, silent yet omnipresent. A figure appeared near the edge of the property, trying to remain unseen. Sam didn't move immediately. He allowed his presence to be sensed, subtle but unmistakable. The man froze, recognizing instinctively that he had entered a space where authority was absolute. Panic replaced calculation. Every movement became hesitant, measured against the awareness that the consequences of misstep could be severe. Sam didn't need to raise his voice, brandish a weapon, or make a threat. The man's own fear, combined with the certainty of Sam's observation, enforced compliance more effectively than any overt display of power could. "You're far from home," Sam said calmly, the words carrying weight without aggression. The figure flinched, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Do you understand where you've wandered?" I didn't mean anything," the man stammered. I was just what?" Sam interrupted, tilting his head slightly. Presence alone demanded honesty. Curiosity is dangerous. Ambition without knowledge is fatal. The man's body went rigid, and he nodded quickly, understanding the unspoken lesson. Boundaries in Sam DeStefano's world were absolute, reinforced not by spectacle, but by awareness, presence, and the unrelenting weight of consequence. The man bolted into the night, leaving behind the silence that had enveloped the street, a silence that now carried the echoes of fear and obedience. Sam remained on the street for a few moments longer, watching the snow drift lazily, listening to the city's subtle murmurs, and reflecting on the constant vigilance required to maintain his empire. Control was not a single act of domination, it was a network of influence sustained by observation, calculated intervention, and strategic enforcement. Every whisper, every movement, every small deviation was accounted for. Loyalty was preserved not only through rewards, but through the silent understanding that any misstep carried consequences that could be both immediate and enduring. Returning to his private quarters later, Sam looked out over the cityscape, lights twinkling beneath a layer of snow. The streets, the alleys, the warehouses all were part of a living network that he understood, manipulated, and controlled. The threats, the ambitions, the disruptions, they existed. But they were manageable. His awareness, patience, and subtle enforcement ensured that order persisted, that loyalty endured, and that the balance of power remained intact. The city beneath him was alive with potential, but he had learned to navigate it with a precision that was invisible yet absolute. Tonight, no gunshots had rung out, no blood had been spilled, no spectacle demanded attention, and yet the city had been reminded of its true order, its invisible hierarchy, and the silent authority of a man who moved through shadows, observing, calculating, and enforcing consequences with unflinching precision. Sam DeStefano understood the nature of power, that it was not about domination alone, but about control, patience, and the strategic application of fear and loyalty. And in that understanding, the city's underworld remained exactly as he intended. Quiet, obedient, and ever aware of the unseen hand that guided it. The city breathed around Sam DeStefano, a living organism of light, shadows, and whispers that carried secrets few could perceive. Chicago never truly slept, it only shifted rhythms under the cover of night. Sam walked through its streets with the confidence of a man who understood every pulse, every tremor, every undercurrent of tension that ran beneath the seemingly ordinary facade. He had spent decades learning to move through this world with the subtlety of a shadow, to enforce authority not with spectacle, but with observation, patience, and precise intervention. Tonight was no different, yet somehow it carried the weight of reflection, a subtle recognition of the empire he had built, the lives he had influenced, and the enduring presence he had established. As he moved along the familiar alleys of his territory, Sam's mind catalogued everything: the faint marks of recent footsteps, the slight shifts in trash bins and crates, the distant murmur of voices that betrayed curiosity or hesitation. Every detail mattered, every anomaly was a signal. The city was alive with ambition and fear, but it was also predictable to those who knew how to read its patterns. Sam had become fluent in the language of subtlety, in the art of control exercised without immediate violence, in the power of presence and reputation that extended far beyond any single confrontation. Observation was his tool, patience his weapon, and quiet enforcement his hallmark. He stopped at a corner where two streets converged, a place where shadows pulled thickly and light fractured across the pavement. Here, in this quiet intersection, the pulse of the underworld often revealed itself. Men who sought advantage, outsiders testing boundaries, even loyal associates with wavering ambition, all revealed their intentions through small, unconscious movements. Sam did not approach hastily. He let the tension accumulate, letting his presence be sensed rather than announced. The weight of authority carried invisibly, but it was unmistakable. Fear, subtle and controlled, could enforce obedience more effectively than any spectacle of violence. A figure emerged from the shadows, someone attempting to pass unnoticed, yet betraying signs of hesitation and internal calculation. Sam observed quietly, allowing the man to recognize, almost instinctively, that he was being watched. The instinctual fear that surfaced in response to invisible authority was more powerful than any immediate threat. It created lasting impressions, lasting lessons. The man's eyes widened as he became aware, heart racing, breath shallow. Every decision, every movement, every plan he had conceived in this space now hung in the balance. "You understand where you are," Sam said funnily, his voice calm, precise, carrying the weight of inevitability. The man froze completely, realizing the invisible boundary he had crossed. Panic overtook reason. Yet instinctive understanding of consequence replaced immediate thought. The city itself seemed to bend, if only metaphorically, around the silent assertion of authority that Sam represented. The lessons of loyalty, fear, and control had been instilled countless times before, yet each new encounter required the same precision, the same patience, the same recognition that power exercised subtly was far more enduring than power demonstrated with spectacle. I didn't mean to, the man stammered, voice trembling under the weight of awareness. I thought. Sam repeated, tilting his head slightly, letting the question linger. Curiosity has a cost. Ambition without understanding is fatal. The man nodded quickly, knees weak, understanding the lesson without further demonstration. Sam did not step closer. He did not need to. Presence alone, patient and calculated, ensured obedience. The man bolted into the shadows, disappearing into the cold night, leaving behind an echo of fear that would linger long after the encounter had ended. In the quiet aftermath, the streets remained still, but the lesson had been delivered, reinforced, silently through the acknowledgement of authority and the certainty of consequence. Sam continued along his familiar path, boots crunching softly in the snow, coat collar turned high against the chill. He reflected on the intricate network of influence he had constructed over decades. Every decision, every subtle observation, every quiet enforcement had contributed to the delicate balance that allowed him to navigate this world without being undone by ambition, betrayal, or miscalculation. Men moved through his territory, aware that deviation carried consequence, yet uncertain of its exact nature. It was the uncertainty, the invisible enforcement of rules that ensured long-term obedience and maintained the structure of his power. Later, he entered one of his warehouses, a hub of activity that remained efficient and disciplined under his unseen control. Men reported quietly, aware that observation was constant, attention thorough, and patience unyielding. Sam absorbed the information, noting not only the facts but the nuances, hesitation in tone, shifts in posture, fleeting expressions that betrayed intention. Every detail was cataloged, every anomaly remembered. In the quiet enforcement of influence, Sam had mastered the art of control without relying solely on spectacle or overt displays of violence. Loyalty and fear intertwined seamlessly, producing obedience that was both voluntary and inevitable. As the night deepened, Sam walked to a vantage point overlooking the city, snowflakes drifting silently in the cold air. He considered the broader implications of his presence, the web of influence that extended far beyond the immediate territory he patrolled. The ripple effects of decisions made in quiet rooms, the subtle lessons delivered through observation and awareness. Power, he understood, was not simply about domination. It was about the strategic orchestration of fear, loyalty, and perception. He had created a system where consequences were understood without constant reinforcement, where influence extended invisibly through the network he controlled. In this moment, he recognized the weight of legacy. Sam DeStefano had moved through the shadows of Chicago, shaping its underworld with a quiet authority that few could see but all could sense. Men remembered lessons not through spectacle alone, but through subtle reminders, through the awareness that deviation carried inevitable consequence, and through the certainty that observation was constant. Control was exercised without unnecessary violence, enforced without spectacle, and maintained with a patience that extended beyond immediate gain. This was the true power of influence, quiet, calculated, and enduring. Finally, he stepped away from the window, moving through the silent streets one last time before retiring for the night. The city seemed to exhale in the darkness, acknowledging the presence of a force both unseen and undeniable. Every alley, every shadow, every whispered rumor carried the imprint of his authority. He had learned to navigate, manipulate, and enforce through observation, patience, and strategic intervention. The underworld of Chicago would remember him not for the chaos he created, but for the order he maintained, the silent, unflinching enforcement of rules that ensured loyalty, inspired fear, and commanded respect. Tonight, no shots had been fired, no confrontations had erupted, and no spectacle had demanded attention. Yet the city, the men who moved within it, and the network of influence he had meticulously constructed had all been reminded of the reality. Sam DeStefano was present, aware, and absolute. Control was not an act, but a living force, exercised through patience, observation, and the subtle assertion of authority. The legacy he had built was complete in its quiet perfection, and the shadows of Chicago carried his influence with unbroken certainty. And as the snow fell softly over the silent city, Sam DeStefano walked alone through the streets he knew so intimately, a figure of quiet power, an embodiment of invisible authority, and a master of a world shaped not by chaos, but by the relentless, precise, and enduring weight of silence. In this silence, his empire endured, his lessons remained, and his legacy was written not in headlines but in the unspoken, unwavering acknowledgement of those who dared to exist within the sphere of his influence.